Hello, John. Thank you for coming to the show. And we have a lot to talk about, especially this, new conflict that's
Something
starting to
happened
rise.
this week that I missed.
Yeah, right, right. So there's a lot to talk about. But before we begin our discussion about this new crisis in Israel and Gaza and the wider potential um, outlays of this,
And how it's
please.
put the Ukrainian thing on the bench somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing and how
Yeah,
Zelensky feels
which
like
could
he's like,
be equally significant for that war, but we're all too busy over here noticing what will happen there. But we'll get into that. Yes.
yeah. So we're going to cover the gambit here. But before we start, I'd like you just to tell the audience how to, how to get to your website, what things you offer, your periodicals, and how they can support your work.
Well, the way to contact me to have free samples of my Hogue Prophecy Report, which I usually release bi-weekly or sometimes once a month. It depends on what's going on in the world. Like I just produced it. It's a PDF download. So I do this a little low tech so that I can be free of all the YouTube censorship and all of that. So it's $60 for 12 months, or you can get it as just a single one time. It's all explained and at my website, or you can get it as an automatic payment set up on PayPal, and so it's just $5 a month. But anyway, what it is I usually do I usually do 3 articles, but I have written out and around under 13,000 words, but this one is 22,000 words with 8 articles dealing with all the things that have happened in the last week, which are quite prophetically significant. And so yeah, you can get that, and you can also get you can also sample some of the articles free, and then decide if you want to join by going to hogueprophecy.com. That's HOGUEPROPHECY.com. The third thing I offer is I do private readings on Zoom, where I take the stuff I've learned from reading the world for many decades, and give it all to you, and then we can read your world, and it's lots of fun. And so you'll see at the top of hogueprophecy.com, and you'll see at the end when this video is out, you'll see Paul will have the information for you to look at on the page. But you can just see it on the website. It says Hogue Readings, and so you click on that email and you put Hogue Reading in it, and you don't need to put anything else. I'll see Hogue Reading, and I'll get back to you immediately and give you the information, the times and stuff are available. And actually, there's been a lot of rush for readings in October. So hopefully, you can contact me soon and we can lock down some times.
So just a little fact that people probably don't know about me. One of my favorite months actually is October, but it's not because of like crashes in the stock market or these crazy events that happen. It's because the I was a big fan of U2, the band U2, especially in the early days.
Mm.
And so their second album was called October. And
Yeah,
so that was part of the reason. And I just like the changing of the seasons and the falling
yeah,
of
I do
the
too.
leaves and stuff, the autumn kind of thing. So, especially in Michigan, what I remember in Michigan, the changing of the leaves. And October was my favorite month. But just everyone know, make sure that you click the links. I have links in the description for John. You click that link, it'll take you to his webpage so you can get the offerings that he provides. So please help support John. He does great work, and he's a character. I think and I think you'll learn a lot. So just help support him, and sign up for the things that he offers. So John, before you start, I just wanted to bring up that little fact that I told you before we started recording,
Very
and
interesting.
for the ones that don't know, the Jewish people just went through a major season of holidays, plural. And it basically started with Rosh Hashanah, and then it goes about 10 days later to Yom Kippur, and then shortly after Yom Kippur there is this a season of Sukkot, where we kind of eat in a hut, right? So it's like these little, we build these little huts. So there was this relatively big hut that was built on right by the library at Bryant Park, which was where I celebrated Sukkot in New York City. But and then right after that is Simchas Torah. So that's the ending of the reading of the Torah and the beginning of it's a scroll. So, it goes around and around, right? So, it's the ending of the cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. So Sukkot is kind of like the harvest season. So you're bringing in your crops and you're celebrating that. You're ending the Torah reading and you're beginning a new cycle. So Rosh Hashanah is this beginning of this retribution, that, kind of like a countdown to Yom Kippur, which is Judgment Day. So you're supposed to think about what you've done wrong and how to improve yourself and become a better person, based on mitzvahs and all this, right? So normally on the first night, the shofar, which is a ram's horn, is blown by usually the cantor. We have a special cantor that reads the Torah during the high holy days. So that is normally blown on the first night. In Israel, there's only one night of Rosh Hashanah. In the diaspora outside of Israel, there's two nights, right? So the first night of Rosh Hashanah and the second night in diaspora, you hear the shofar being blown. But if the first night starts on a Sabbath, you cannot blow the shofar because you're not supposed to carry items during the Sabbath into the shul. So to prevent anyone carrying something that shouldn't be, they said, okay, we will not even carry a ram's horn. So we couldn't blow the shofar on the first night because it was on the Sabbath. That is a bad omen for the Jewish people, because blowing the shofar, this ram's horn, kind of silence the prosecutor, because the prosecutor is telling God, look at all these people that did all these things wrong, right? We blow the shofar to kind of get, to silence him, to quiet him down, to create noise so he can't speak. And so we can ask for forgiveness to God. Well, so because we couldn't do that, this is kind of a bad omen. All right. It so happens to coincide with the 50th anniversary with the Yom Kippur War. So in 1973, we had a similar situation that took place, but it was during Yom Kippur. In this case, it was at the end of Sukkot in Simchas Torah. But this whole season is kind of all put together as a series of holidays. It's a very holy time period for the Jewish people. So in that context, I just wanted to make sure people had just a little bit of a background, because you're going to go pretty deep in, both sides and, and the wider conflict and all this. So take it away, John.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear about the issue of the shofar is, I wonder if Hamas knew that. I mean,
I don't know. Maybe.
Hamas is, it's an interesting, since we're talking about a holiday that deals also with atonement, mistakes made, and then finally kind of pushing through that to in a positive, almost like a New Year's way, a new life, a new level. Who created Hamas? Hamas was Israeli government. Back when back many years back ago, it was used as a way to split the Palestinians politically. Fatah and PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, were dominant in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. The idea was and this is when Israeli forces were occupying and policing the Gaza Strip. So what had happened is that the idea was to take the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the basis of Hamas, to um, uh, create a Palestinian wing that later became Hamas. That then, with the Israeli army looking back and allowing it had to happen, and allowing Hamas to move freely through Gaza, but not Fatah, there was a civil war. And in the civil war, Fatah was thrown out of Gaza Strip, and now then divided the Palestinians. So in an act, so it's a bit of a Dr. Frankenstein story, Hamas. You know, certain doctors of Israeli leading in the Zionist movement and others thought that they could weaken the Palestinians further by dividing and conquering them. And so they kind of supported Hamas. But, you know, the problem with any monster that you create is that it breaks free and then it comes back for you. So that is another thing to consider atoning, because many of the people who are condemning Hamas today, they are responsible for creating it. They made the monster. Now the golem is moving, you know, and crushing and killing children and women, and surprising suddenly an unexpected attack. And that was also unusual. It's similar to what happened in 1973. And that was a time when the Israeli Defense Forces were far superior than they are now. They were really a citizens' army to admire, especially in the 60s, the Six-Day War and all that. I remember watching that as a kid, and I was saying, wow, these are truly the greatest citizen soldiers in the world. And even with the mistake, being caught with your pants down, with Sadat and all the Egyptian army coming in from one side, and then you had Syria coming to try to retake the Golan Heights with about 800 tanks on the other side. I mean, the nation had to pick up their arms, get to work, go out and defend it. It was very difficult because Sadat's strategy was to cross the Nile, and with these huge hoses to take down the big abutments that had been put up by the Israelis, and then move the Egyptian army only so far into Sinai, where it was still covered by missile and air superiority, which drew in the Israeli Air Force, which lost a lot of jets in this process. But because the Syrians were having trouble, and Hafiz al-Assad was then the father of Bashar al-Assad, was the leader of the Syrians. He was demanding Sadat move farther in to save us and get the pressure off of us. So here's Israel fighting a two-front war they never planned for, and were caught in surprise. So slowly, the Israeli forces began to gain ground because the Egyptians went out of their protection zone. And then Israel had air superiority, and that's what turned the tide. But it's really surprising to see the mistake being made again. And it's at a time when, you know, since the attempt to take southern Lebanon in 82. I mean, even then, a lot of the mainstream news was starting to wonder, what's happened to the Israeli army? It seems a bit more lumberous, bureaucratic, slower to advance, and there's problems with command and control. There's, well, they were basically fought to a standstill in Lebanon and eventually had to leave. even though the arrangement was to get the Palestinian PLO, the militant side with Yasser Arafat, out of there because he was based in southern Lebanon. That was a defeat. Yom Kippur in 73 was started as a defeat that was pulled out as a victory. But it was also a victory for the Arabs because it was the first time they really defeated in the same war the Israeli forces. And as time went by, it appears to me that there are cycles in all groups of people in history where you have, I mean, we're having it kind of here in America. We used to be the can-do. We would go and do everything. We were um, optimistic and full of life and all. And we were kind of in the 40s. We were the China that was building the greatest economy in the world, but not really considered that so much until the arsenal of democracy happened. And this very same now unit looking in a military context is the military industrial complex, which has been exposed by the Ukrainian war, that the products that they make aren't very good. They're really expensive. They break down. They sink in the mud because the tanks are too heavy in the mud in Ukraine. And the United States has lost its industrial base. Selling it to China, it's not China's fault. If I come and say, look, I'm going to give you all these industries, you're going to go, okay, and so I can't blame the Chinese. That we did that. We sold our industrial base away, and we sold the ability, which Russia has regained in this new war in Ukraine. We'll be talking about both because even though everybody's focusing on the one, they're interrelated pretty big, and one offsets the other in a rapid change in situation in Ukraine that's going on right now, and nobody's reporting it except a few people like me and others that might like my sources. Which is the other thing. If you get into looking at my articles, you're going to go. I'm kind of the gatekeeper of a world of alternative media sources that are really vetted. I've had many of them, some of them for 23 years, some of them for 10, 12 years. And I've taken a long time. Most of the time I've lived in this century is vetting people that are constantly accurate in whatever is thrown at us. And I have those people there in my work. So I'm kind of on top of my own prophetic angle and unique angles that I take from what they say. And it's from all directions, my sources, is all sides. It's well worth checking it out because I can be a doorway to a free media, a completely different media that has all the talent that left the old now propaganda organ called our media. That's CNN, Fox, and the legacy media, BBC, all of that. And I've appeared on all of those over my many documentaries and specials and interviews. I've worked at BBC. I've worked at Sky News. I used to debate Sean Hannity on Fox. And fluster him. I did CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, on The View. I was on The View once, and CBS. And that was when you could actually get a word in when I was on The View in those days. Now it's just, when Barbara Walters died, that was the beginning of the end of The View being anything but a dog and pony show. And but it was still good then, even though Joy Behar was she kind of liked me because I'm basically secretly I'm a comic myself, so she was like throwing some zingers and I was just throwing them right back, and she was like, oh this guy's a comic. I think you have to be a comic to deal with the often horrific things that one has to deal with. Get brought to me by the power of the internet and cell phones and stuff. I mean, you can, if you work it right, you see everything. And I mean, everything. Like the fact that the Hamas really did go out to kill and murder civilians. I know because I've seen them. I've seen hundreds of pictures of people that died, men, women, and children, safe rooms broken into, and everybody shot. It's kind of odd, though. I haven't seen any 23 babies without heads. That was actually kind of a right-wing Zionist plant. That's the source of that. Some guys who was, was known as a very right-wing guy making that, but it's not there. However, I did see beheaded Israeli soldiers, and I'm wondering why isn't anybody up in arms and crying about that? I mean, I've got to put it to you. This is the way I flow like a river, so we'll be going back and forth to many different themes, and I just follow the flow. I've always wondered, I don't know if some of you have wondered or all of you have wondered, there's something that's always got me about how everybody melts down when children are killed, but they don't when any other stage of human life is slaughtered. From old tween teens, and it's still some, but when people are like from 20 onward, and then when they get old, it does not have the same charge, which is different from me. It has the same charge for anyone of any age who is outraged by some kind of terrible crime and violence. And I started to ponder on it. Why is it? And what came to me was that, and it's not conscious that people do this inordinately, freak out when children die and don't when other people die. It's because children still have this light of their innocent enlightenment that came through as children, this innocence, this light, this fresh intelligence that is not yet completely conditioned to be identifying as an Arab or a Jew or an American or a Russian or a Christian or a Muslim, and to then take up, sort of like baby sheep. If you ever watched Baby Sheep, I have a whole bunch near my neighborhood here. And when they're babies, they're just like dancing around and it's really wonderful and sweet. And then it doesn't take them long because their sheep life is fast. Their heads are down in the grass for the rest of their life until their ass is grass, And so there is a quality that happens to human beings when they quote unquote grow up. And because our society has not yet found a way to draw out this innocence, this oceanic, taken for granted innocence, like a baby fish is born out of the sea's waters, and you might be going, I hear all these people talking about the ocean. I don't see any ocean. He's just swimming around. I don't see any ocean anywhere. Oh, what's that bright little object there? Oh, I want to get going. Looks like it might be something I can eat. And then suddenly he's hooked out. He's hooked out of the water, and he ends up on the deck of the SS Ego, where people are going, a new tender innocent fish. That is, let our egos eat it, and so, but most of the fish get eaten and they're digested into egoic people that have forgot the oceanic. But this little fish managed to get off the hook and flop and flip and go through the gunwales and go splashing into the ocean. And at the moment he returned to the ocean, it was like, this is the ocean. I am the ocean. I live and die in the ocean. The whole ocean is everywhere. And it's so wonderful and vast and so ubiquitous, so ordinary, that I missed it. And that's our enlightenment that we bring into the world. It is so ordinary to be a Buddha, an awakened one, or to be Christ conscious. It's so the very essence of ordinary that it's very easy to be brought into the world, in a world that have forgotten that ordinariness, who don't even see ordinariness as something special. They're always seeking and striving and, oh, I've got to find God, I've got to atone, I've got to do this and that. That they're all, every move they're making is away from the ordinary state of being a Buddha, an awakened one. And I mean, that's why my teacher used to say, and I've said it on the show before, but this is another angle to it. He used to say, when asked about what he saw when he saw all of us, he used to say, I think you are great. I see that you are all Buddhas, pretending not to be. And so, and then he said, some of you are Buddhas pretending to be Buddhas. You can't pretend to be a Buddha if you're a Buddha. But a lot of people pretend even to be a Buddha, pretend even to be godliness. But and he always used to say, I'm just an ordinary man. And it always seemed, because he was full of this light and beauty, and he would basically say enlightenment is the most ordinary thing there is. And I guess when it's understood, it's like another Lama, Tibetan Lama once said, enlightenment is the ultimate disappointment, because there's no point to it. There's no need for a point. It is. It isn't at the same time. So children have that. They're that fish. They come into the world, and there's something oceanic about them. Even the parents adore them, because it's like, why do we adore children? It's not just that they're cute, and they're very cute, but something else. They come in with something that we have lost. We have forgotten it. You cannot lose the ocean. You are the ocean. You are the enlightenment, but you can be taught by society to seek things outside of yourself rather than seek things that are right there at birth. And there are things that you have to seek and learn. You have to learn as an oceanic consciousness how to be contained in the shape of this person, in a world that speaks in dialectics, in a world that's horizontal, where you're always trying to get somewhere. And it's also the getting from being born to life, to then getting old, and then dying, and then being born again to life, getting old and dying. If you understand the reality of, or have experienced reincarnation as I have, there are many lives. Um, and it's the same life born every time, and death is always a new experience. And every time you're born enlightened, and the society turns you into something that is upon it, made of its own image, not the godliness image that you always bring in. So it's always starting anew. It's the ultimate Groundhog's Day. And then eventually, like in the movie Groundhog's Day, you become more and more aware of the patterns, and that you're stuck in this wheel of in fact, they should call it the wheel of samsara day, where you every life you start again, all over again, you go and go. But there are experiences that are contained and memorized by one of your chakra bodies, your mental body. And these are the things that make you aware of, there's just how many times can you spin on this wheel. And I think a lot of it, when you become an old soul, you're getting tired of the game. You're getting tired. And even in Groundhog's Day, there are times where he commits suicide. Him and the marmot go over the cliff as he's going, don't drive angry, don't drive angry. And Bill Murray and the marmot get killed. And he wakes up again to Sonny and Cher, babe, I love you, babe. And then he starts again, and he kind of gets it. So in a way, it's a profound movie about the reincarnated classroom Earth. Is that, and when you commit suicide, or you do this, or you murder that and all that, it always comes back to starting all over again. And the amount of identity that we might pick up for the things we've done, or just don't even feel anymore, they're just part of our memory library. And there's a need in a certain techniques that this is also what I teach, is my master's techniques of meditation, which I usually talk a lot about in the readings that I do. And then I give at the end of the meditation, of the readings, a email with all the different ways that you can learn these meditations, which are tailored for a world like ours today, which is way mind amplified, way too mind amplified. And so and all of these relate to the war, all of this. In fact, what I'm talking about here and now is fundamental to why there's war, why there's misunderstanding, why children become, as adults, maybe it's because we're not very nice people with other people, that when we fight and die, it doesn't have the same hit as the same pain in the heart of a child dying, because we've killed innocents coming into the world. I mean, I've seen the bodies of killed Israeli children. You know, there were 700 people killed in the first day, I think. And I've also seen thousands of Palestinian children killed by these huge bombs and stuff. And I've also seen, I mean, Hamas has its horrors, but then, you know, why did Dr. Frankenstein, Israeli Dr. Frankenstein, create Hamas? Well, maybe the answer to that is a connection to a kind of evil. I thought that Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense of Israel, he made it very clear, and I read it many times and listened to him saying it many times, and it was very clear that he was doing collective punishment to the whole Palestinian people when he said they are all animals. And okay, one can maybe misinterpret that, and he's angry, he's upset. I understand that, but it's not what he said. The angry words he said is what he chased. He chased what he was going to do and then did it. He shut off the fuel, he shut off food, he shut off electricity, he shut off water. How long do you think 2.4 million Palestinians can go without water? And this becomes a new Holocaust committed by the survivors of the last Holocaust. I mean, millions will die. And so these are the traps of identity. The ego survives by competing. Ego survives by dividing, having this illusion that the world is divided. We come in as one with the world. We are turned by 7 to 14 years of education. I call it de-education, because education means to draw out, and the Enlightenment is not being drawn out into our world to find a way to take up the identities we need in life, but not forget the context of this enlightenment that now is visiting the earth in a body form, which is now speaking languages, which needs a hammer to create things and all that. Nothing wrong with a hammer unless you start training your children to believe they're the hammer. It's nothing wrong with being a driver, a sole driver of your body mind vehicle, but if you're told by 7 and 14, and actually then you finally relent and believe it, because they're constantly in different ways, teachers, priests, politicians, pedagogues, and parents are all programmed to try to shape you, to turn you into something else, rather than find a way to balance you with the tools of living as an enlightened being in this world. Well, they just make sure that they train you and reward you for getting your Christ consciousness, your godly consciousness, your Buddha consciousness, and become one of them, so you'll get by here. But the get by that's here is wars, division, a fundamental Maya illusion. I mean, this is what Maya means in Hindu terms and Sanskrit. A lot of people in India don't get this, even, that Maya doesn't mean the world's an illusion. No, it is a changeable reality. It's like waves playing on the surface of the oceanic consciousness you can't say they're not there. You can say that they don't last. They're constantly changing. Whatever rises falls. But they're there as a changeable play of the consciousness of the existence. And so that's all right. But it ends up, so the art that humanity must learn to survive to this next level evolution is a way to bring enlightenment into the world and not suppress it. Because otherwise, that's why we have these wars. We are under the illusion of being separate from each other. We're under the illusion, in fact, we're all, I gotta say it, we're all flaming idiots, exactly as the word was intended. The word in ancient Greek means idios, means one who is making themselves separate from the whole, identified as a different entity against the whole. You against the world rather than the worldliness playing in the world. And that is the simple formula for everything that goes wrong, because this identifying it's one thing. It's like you'll find in some of the meditations I teach where, people are, if they go to a horror movie and the bad part's about to happen, the moment, if you watch yourself, the moment you shrink from seeing what's coming next, that's when you've identified with it and you're sure to have a nightmare about it that night when you go to sleep. But if you do the opposite to what the mind, which is an identity-based temporary phenomenon, a great servant if it's being used by the heart and the soul, a terrible master if not. And most of us have been taught to think of ourselves as a mind. We have heads of departments. We don't have hearts of departments. And so that whole mind thing is causes all the pain and suffering, because if you go right into the center of what you want to avoid, if you go right into the center of the pain that's happening in your body or in your heart, rather than avoid it, escape it, I want to be happy, I don't want. If you do opposite from what the mind tells you, you just go straight in with your attention. You will find that the pain will get more vivid, but it will not hurt, because it's identity that makes the pain. I am in pain, rather than pain is there. My teacher Osho was dying. We asked him, how are you feeling today? And he'd look all radiant and go, oh, I'm in complete agony. Just like that. I am in complete agony. It was almost like, oh, okay. I mean, oh, what? No, because he never acted or felt like that, because it was outside of his consciousness, but it was vividly experienced. So I try to apply these lessons I've learned from Osho in my take on the world. So that was what makes me kind of odd sometimes and ask strange questions, that like, why do we freak out when children die, but not so strong when teenagers die, or I break a glass or something there with my hand just now. But no, I didn't. It just, I almost spilled the glass. But anyway, I reached out and hit it. But anyway.
Did you feel pain? Did you feel pain?
What I watched was no, because I immediately retracted. And then the next thing I watched was, thank God I drank all of the electrolyte. It's very sticky to get off books and things. So here we are in something, I've been reporting a lot on the Ukrainian war. I've been reporting on it before it happened, about 2 years before it happened. I was telling people it's coming, it's going to happen. And it almost happened in 2021, when the Ukrainians were starting to set up for something NATO had been preparing them for 9 years or 8 years by that time, training them as a tacit NATO force. In fact, the largest force NATO has after the United States, but not active on the fronts. And Russia showed that it could move from 11 time zones in a few days, a massive force of its own standing army. And that was a message. Like many of the messages that Russia had been saying, which you will not hear in the mainstream press, the attempts to create peace, the attempts to keep Ukraine from being broken up and destroyed, which is its destiny now. Russia and Putin, the president of Russia, worked very hard with the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements, with the guarantors being the President Hollande of France and Chancellor Merkel of Germany, Not one, but twice they tried this. And then when the war started, because you won't hear this either, the Ukrainians built up again on the line of contact at the Donbass, and they actually had started their softening barrages. I mean, that first day when you're seeing all the barrages, if you saw some of the footage of it in the distance and stuff, that was all Ukrainian. Ukrainians they're launching it a week too soon, because they actually were planning to set off on the 10th of March, but the Russians jumped the gun on them. It's like, I later found out Vladimir Putin grew up in the mean streets of Leningrad, and he once commented on it during the war. He said, 50 years ago, when I was growing up in the streets of Leningrad, I learned this lesson from the streets. If you cannot avoid a fight with somebody, hit first. And that's what Russia did. They were coming up, they're getting ready. NATO would give them all this training, 160,000 Ukrainians. Russia hit them first. And my father, who grew up in Watts in California during the Depression, is probably the only gringo in a barrio. It was a barrio at that time. So he literally had to fight his way to school and fight his way home. And he learned as a kid to be then later a champion Army Air Force boxer. He taught me a lot of things about that, and how, he said, when you got a group of people, and if there's a guy who's the loudest mouth, hit him first. Just boom, and that'll usually stop the problem. If that doesn't stop the problem, he used to say, okay, take your first shot. And as he's saying it, there comes the punch. And so I get Putin's point of view. He obviously had a similar experience in life like my father. We'll get to the main theater of trouble today, but before I forget, I want to talk about what happened to poor little Ukraine, which has been put on the football bench of history, and Zelensky and all of that. It's sort of basically what's the big news that's going to happen next, on top of whatever big things happen in this convergence into the land of Armageddon, into Israel, where Armageddon is, Megiddo, is the fortress, one of the most ancient places of civilization in the region, in the plains there of Megiddo or Jezreel. It used to be the fort that over the ridge of mountains that was the main path for tradesmen and trading to Egypt, ancient Egypt, when it was in its peak over that area. And so it was also the place where the Romans marched in 69 to one of the places they invaded, eventually laid siege to Jerusalem, and destroyed the second temple, the great temple of Herod. And but I digress to poor Ukraine, who's saying, what about me? Ukraine has utterly lost the war with this summer offensive, which had been delayed it was supposed to be a winter offensive, and it's a spring offensive and summer offensive. They literally destroyed their strategic reserves, 90,000 casualties, and only a few square miles taken, a few wiped out villages like Robotino and others. Hardly any advances. In the same period of time, Russia advanced and got more territory throughout the summer, when said and done. And now all the weapons of a thinned out American military industrial complex, who cannot sit down and manufacture. A lot of people in America say, well, we're going to do an arsenal of democracy. I call it the RC hole of democracy. There's no arsenal. There's no factories. We sold them to China, and they're building their armies just fine, thank you. And they can, without a blink, can manufacture a few million shells. And the other thing too is that America and Israel is a part of this mindset because it's an ally of America. We have spent since the end of the Cold War, fighting little colonial actions against enemies that cannot do anything but be overwhelmed by us. You know, the Iraqi army and operation in the Persian Gulf War in 1991, the Iraqi army may have been the fifth largest and massive army in the world, but it was a bunch of pot-bellied militia people who just played soldier on the weekend, and except for the Republican Guard, which was a real elite group, the rest of the Iraqi army was worthless against that. And at that time, when we, in Operation Desert Shield, when we moved 600,000, I mean, that was the last time multi-operational NATO trained. This is when the United States and Britain, everybody, were still in the mode of NATO strategies and training. And they were formidable. And we showed fighting a completely unworthy opponent. So it wasn't much of a match. It was just like the Muhammad Ali coming in to fight Pee Wee Herman. You know, and he sort of played with him a little bit, and then bam, bam, and that was it in 100 hours, which would be equivalent in a war of a first round. He was out. And so we got used to playing. The problem when you're so big like that is you start playing bully, because, you know, you can just take on everybody. But over the years, we stopped. It wasn't affordable to the military industrial complex to keep having big arsenals and the ability to make all kinds of weapons, because Russia was defeated, right? We still keep NATO, and we still have NATO encroaching upon them. And in fact, it is a fact that's coming out that NATO always intended to advance upon Russia's borders, with the idea of overthrowing Russia and breaking it up. That's starting to come out now. Since the 1990s, you know, and the Russians were constantly saying, you're breaking the rules. We had disagreement, not a step forward east. Warsaw Pact has disappeared, disbanded because the war's over. Is NATO going to no? You're not going to dissolve NATO? Why? What's the reason for NATO? We could join NATO. You know, it's like it's now the war is over. Well, no, because the war was not. The military industrial complex, if you follow the money, you follow the real reasons why war keeps going, because America is terribly addicted to war. And it makes a lot of money for a certain cadre of Americans. And they've gotten soft too by just making the whole way. See, it's simply like this. Russia, after Putin helped it rise out of the oligarch era and the time of troubles and kicked the American carpetbaggers out, all the GMOs that were just starting to do what Europeans and European-based leadership in America had wanted to do since Charles the 12th in 1700 in the Great Northern War. Russia was always too big. We want all its resources in the Western European world. And so all these different attempts to take Russia out, you know, even after World War II, that's coming out, the Freedom of Information Act in America had this idea of using tactical nuclear weapons and invading the same routes that Hitler used, and taking and breaking up Russia and letting Europe and Russia and NATO break it up and, you know, enslave the people there or divide them so they have no power of their 11 time zones, and just exploit it, because it's like, well, why don't we have all of that? Well, you know, Charles XII lost against Peter the Great, and then Napoleon Bonaparte set up an army of 20 European nations to invade Russia in 1812, were annihilated, with also great loss of life on the Russian side. It always happens in these. And then 129 years later, Hitler had many of the same amassed European people in the Axis alliance, including a lot of SS units, that, including later in Ukraine, that are the basis of Nazis in Ukraine today, that are now in power. This created this whole situation where basically, once again, here comes, oh, we're just maneuvering, it was not a problem, and then 3 million Axis allies crash into Russia and kill 27.5 million Russians. Greatest loss of life of any nation in history. And with all that that's happened, you see NATO encroaching. And then you find out that Merkel and Hollande in those Minsk agreements they were not interested in. I mean, Putin was trying to keep Ukraine together. He was trying to get a system where Ukraine would survive, Crimea would stay, he said, because frankly, Crimea has been part of Russia except for about 50, 60 years. It has been for 300 years part of Russia. So that was the agreement. And also that's strategic for Russia because the attempt to take Ukraine into NATO was to take Crimea and deny Russia access to the Black Sea. I mean, this is a strategy of it. Putin's a strategist. He says, no, you're not. And so that doesn't go to you. But the Donbass, why not keep, if the Donbass Russian-speaking people are given some autonomy, if you're not sending your Nazi militias there to slaughter them in 2014 and shell their cities and continue to shell their cities for 9 years. It's still going on. And you'll see all of that at Hogue Prophecy. You'll see another history that nobody's telling you about. And so it finally came to war, and now NATO is losing that proxy war. And America is no longer an arsenal of democracy, but a grift. The military-industrial complex has been shown creates highly expensive, complicated artillery or jets. The F-35 is a mess. Often it's 5% of its number is broken down with some problem. I hate to think what's going to happen if they ever were put up against Su-24s and Su-25s, the Russians. The Russian jets are very good. They are 10 years ahead of us in hypersonic and super hypersonic weapons. The reason being that, and I remember seeing Putin lay it out on the 1st of March, 2018, in his speech to the nation. He delayed it because he wanted to wait and hear what that would be Trump's nuclear policies were going to be of first use and all that. So he waited to see when that would be declared so he could respond to it. And he told the story about how in the ABM treaty under George W. Bush was unanimously, suddenly, America just dropped out of it in 2002. And so that now they could create ABM missiles that could then surround Russia. And then if missiles lit off, they could be destroyed, and maybe thinking the unthinkable rather than mutually assured destruction, which is bad enough. If you start making nuclear wars appear to be winnable, that's the end of the civilization. The appearance, the idea that, oh, maybe we can get away with this. No, you will not. And the world will go down with you. And so Russia learned their lessons. The Russians learned their lessons, and they have often had very hard lessons, like when you lose 27 million people. What do you learn from that? And so they realized that the Soviet Union's mistake was it tried to match the U.S. might and U.S. economy's ability to wage the Cold War against it. So Putin kind of asked Bush, he said, well, okay, so what you're saying is it's kind of, this treaty is over, so if we want to kind of make different kinds of technologies, we can. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Bush, not a great mind. And so what they did from 2002 to 2018 was create a system of delivery systems for conventional nuclear weapons, which are 10 years ahead of anything the United States is doing. And they did something really smart. I said, look, we've been working with hypersonic all through the Soviet period, trying to work it out. So we've done the basis for it. And since our military industrial complex is part of the state, therefore, there's certainly finances and profits that happen, but the focus is on the function, not the profit, in our military industrial complex, which usually was only 70 billion to Right now, it's still around 120 billion, and we have, almost 800 billion a year that we're putting it in. The Russians are making better things. Their focus is on performance rather than profit. Ours is not. That big boondoggle, the F-35 was just made to make people a lot of money, and by making an all-purpose jet, which is kind of stupid in a way. If this jet can also flip flapjacks and fire a missile and tell you when you're having your period or something, it's like, isn't that a little too much information? And is there a way to go? And so it did, and it doesn't work. And those guns, all those howitzers, those 777 howitzers, those 155 millimeter ones we sent by the hundreds to Ukrainians, they had a lot of pressure. They were built for just being loaded in a helicopter into a fire base in Afghanistan to fire a couple shots at a bunch of guys hiding under rocks. But in a real war, in a big war, they were breaking down. They were too fragile. And then the Ukrainians would fire them to the point where the barrel was no longer functional. Some of them, I've seen pictures where it blew up like a flower. So they didn't take out barrels and replace barrels. Then that broken piece of junk has to then be dragged through all the missile fire all the way to the Western Ukraine, where it can be fixed by US troops in Poland, and then rolled back. And if it survives the journey and doesn't get hit by a missile or a drone, then it can fire a few times again. And so the world's watching, and the military industrial complex has been exposed as not able to wage this war in Ukraine. It is not able to sustain Israel's bombardment and rendering into rubble the Gaza Strip. Now, what will happen is Americans have a whole lot of ironclad bombs from probably in World War II and other earlier days, before the guided bombs, the JDAMs and all of that. They have those in droves, and so they're going to send those to the Israelis, who will then have bombs that are as accurate as the bombs that carpet bombed Hamburg and Dresden and other places indiscriminately. So you're now going to send a modern army, not with surgical strikes at buildings where bunkers of Hamas are hiding. Now it's just going to be a whole neighborhood-wide carpet bombing, and you've taken their food and their water away and their power. And frankly, I gotta say, and if, the Abby Martin Empire Files is one of my sources, and I highly recommend that you look at this very brave American reporter and her partner, her husband, and see what's really going on. And she's Jewish, so it's not like she goes to both sides. She talks to both sides. You will see some pretty amazing things that are the core of what's wrong there, what's not working there. And you probably don't know about the March of Return, a lot of you, that this was back in 2019, 2008, 2018, 2019, around that period. The Palestinians finally listened to people saying, well, why don't you just do something peaceful? Why don't you peacefully demonstrate for a change? Okay, we've tried everything else. Why not? And so they started coming out every Friday after prayers. They're Muslims, so they would come out. And their idea was to walk up to the 300-meter no-go zone of all these Israeli sniper towers and bunkers all around. It's a concentration camp, folks. It's not a prison. If you're in a prison, it's because you did something wrong. Did this little Palestinian babies and children, did they do something wrong? Yeah, they were Palestinians. Kind of like the way the Germans treated people in the Warsaw Ghetto. Well, what's wrong with me? I'm not. It's because you're a Jew. It's because you're a Palestinian. And it's so ironic that it's happening in the family of Semites, in the brothers and sisters who seek their origin from Abraham. Abraham is the father of all Semitic races. They come from his blood. You might dispute Hagar, who is the servant girl that made Ishmael through him, because Sarah had been barren, they were getting old. And Ishmael is the eldest. I was thinking, okay, well, now I have an eldest son. And then what then happened is Sarah had a miracle, and or maybe she wasn't as old as the Bible said, but anyway, she started having children. And Isaac was one of them. And so the question has always been, and it starts the origin of this problem, which is reaching its climax in this war of thousands of years. Who is the legitimate son of Abraham? Ishmael or Isaac? For me, both. They come from, it's not a question of, in the rules of the game, in biblical times, the father's seed defines who it is. Now, I'm not either for nor against that. I think people are equally unique in their own right, and they are a seed upon themselves, a Buddha upon themselves. But okay, that's okay. If that's the game, then it's not a dispute between Hagar and Sarah. They're both from the seed of Abraham. And I was just reading, because I was trying to understand the whole concept of greater Israel, which is a very big concept amongst very right-wing, I would call fascist, Zionist supremacists, which are kind of taking that out of context again. I mean, I'm going to put in this new article, a map that shows New Israel that goes all the way to the Euphrates, goes all the way to the east bank of the Nile, and everything in between. Is supposed to be, according to what God told Abraham, this is the lands of the Semite race. But it was for all his children, the ones from Hagar, the ones from Sarah. It was for all their children, because they were all his children. I bequeath these lands to all of you. How it's now become just the seed of Isaac is an interesting problem. And of course, to be fair, the Quran has Ishmael as the legitimate son. So you have two wings of a same race who are playing the game of victimizer and victim, and then switching for thousands of years. And so this is all coming to a head, and it's ancient. It's one. I find it in a lot of ways it's been a blessing to live in a kind of baby country, baby country with bombs, but a baby country like America, because I've come to understand just my own past life memories, and then just seeing in other countries. I had for a long time, a French girlfriend for 7 years, so I intimately understood how difficult it is for the French to an old culture, brings more burdens and challenges to somebody who's programmed in this Groundhog's Day. Oh, now you're in France rather than America. Okay, well, there's going to be a lot of old conditioning. Oh, now you're from Israel, or you're from Palestine. Oh, wow, now we're going back thousands of years. Or you're Hindu, and now we're going back maybe 10,000 years, according to Rig Veda. And it's hard. Subtleties of deep, deep tradition. Nothing wrong with tradition. Everything wrong about identifying with tradition. That's my view. Use tradition, it can teach. But if it uses you, it does not teach. It dogmatizes. This is the fine line, and the line means everything, how it's taught. And so, and then the deep attachment to a tradition, it's hard. It's hard. And so you've got the Semitic cousin sisters of Abraham struggling with this. I used to, one time I had this guy, I think he was from Mossad or something, and he was going back and forth with me. He lived in Washington, D.C. And he was, I mean, I interacted with him just to try to understand his mind and where his heart was. And um, he was really identified as a Jewish racial person, and he could not see any connections to the Arabs being Semitic. In fact, most of us, even I, for most of my life, I never considered Arabs Semitic. Or talked about, if I talked about Arab Israeli citizens, they go, no, no, what do you mean Arab Israeli citizens? And I said, well, even my editor, one of my editors, he said, well, I have to correct that. I said, no, no, there are Arabs in Israel who are citizens. They're the ones that didn't leave in the Nakba, the catastrophe in 48. And they remained. And they weren't massacred like so many other 500 villages were wiped out. It was bad. It was funny how 1947 had two very significant partitions taking place, one in India and one that started the first Arab-Israeli war. And we've kind of had the wounds of these consequences with us ever since. I mean, right now, India and Pakistan is quiet. But I was there one of the several times that it almost went nuclear, like in 1990. Bush had left his body, and in 1990, I was like, the MiG jets are practicing, everything's getting ready, and the idea was there was going to be a big panzer attack of the Indian Army into the Sindh, split Pakistan in two. And it would, but the only reason why they didn't do it is they were starting to get pictures that looked like the Pakistanis were putting framework on their jets' wings that was qualified to carry nukes. Whether it was a bluff or not, then no one knew, but they didn't want to see their Panzer tanks melting in the Rajasthani desert from the nuclear strike. So they backed off. And anyway, South Asia, climate-wise, everybody's going to get everybody's radiation, and so it would be auto suicide for both sides to do it. And when you consider after 300-400 million Pakistanis and Indians died from the initial effects of blasts and radiation, the mini version of a nuclear winter would be probably comparable to what happened in 1816 when Tambora had a supervolcanic eruption. And it's interesting because that happened in 1815. I always wondered, why was it raining and so cold in June when Napoleon was trying to win the Battle of Waterloo? And weather had a lot to do with him losing, because he was at the ridge of Mont Saint Jean looking at Wellington's Belgian and British forces, and he had a bigger army, but Blucher's Prussian army was away and he had people chasing him. But they couldn't start the battle at dawn because the mud was too thick. All the cannonballs would just stick in the mud. So he had to start it at 11:30 in the morning, lost precious hours. And if he had started it without this kind of weather, Wellington would have been defeated before his more keen-eyed general staff officers saw the Prussians coming from the east. And so he might have had another success like he had in Marengo, where he was losing the battle and won the battle because he was able to take out the Wellington and then go after the Prussians, not dealing with them both. That was the end of Napoleon, and it's because the weather was already changing into what would happen, what it would be in the next year. It was the year 1816 where there was no summer in Europe. And the thing that happened is, intriguingly, it was and I mean, a lot of people died. And if you had that happen again in our time, where we're so much dependent on certain sources of food, the super systems are much larger and richer in one way, but they're structurally a lot more fragile. And this has always been a concern of mine since I've been writing books in 1990 about this, is that if the agricultural industry breaks down, if there's a breakdown in the transport of foods and goods around the world, it'll be the cause of billions of people dying, because it's to our great wonder that we managed to do this, but we do it in a just-in-time kind of system but if there's a disruption in the chain just in time, like just in time getting all the missiles and bombs you need to take out Gaza. Well, that may not be possible. So the other thing too that I've got to say is that Israel, please, Israel, do not take Hamas's bait. And you news reporters trying to get ratings, do not blow up a story that didn't happen. The beheaded babies. Deal with what happened, but understand that your greatest weakness, it's your greatest strength in peacetime, is your greatest weakness in war. Do not decide things with emotion, because Hamas is trying to make you do that. That monster wants you to do that. He wants you to get so angry that you amass 300,000 of your rather soft conscript army that has not been trained to do urban warfare, which is their expertise over across the wall in the concentration camp. Those guys, they've trained it. They're hardcore. They're seasoned. They're organized, and there's 40,000 of them. When a lot of people are starting to allude to the parallels of Stalingrad and city-urban fighting, and just today I was looking at how many the Israeli army is in total is about 140,000. If you take everybody, all the reservists and all the forces, a Navy, Army, Air Force, Special Forces, it's about 140,000. That means it's a little over 500,000. That means it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 1/6 of the population. It's a small country of 6 million people. This is got to be considered as when you lose, when the losses that were incurred in the last Yom Kippur debacle, but was saved, was a large loss of life for a small country, which doesn't have the numbers. So, you lose 100 people, it's like losing 5,000 in America or something like that. So if you lose 3,000 in the 911, it's 30,000 it's like 30,000 for Israel. So there is a finite amount of people to lose. And if you have not learned, and if you're going to learn as you go in the rubble of Gaza, and Rafah, and those places, you're going to find out you're going to have like a Hiroshima, a Iwo Jima kind of situation where you've got people dug in. The American force that invaded Iwo Jima, 1/4 of it was casualties, even though all 22,000, except for a few hundred Japanese, all 20,000 of them were consumed in the battle. But it was 7,000 dead and a total of like 27,000 wounded, I think. It came down to 1 in 4 of the invasion fleet. And that got the Americans thinking, my God, we cannot tolerate those kind of losses. Now, right now, a lot of people, at least in the alternative media, are getting pretty clear about that. Everything is said about the Ukrainian front that the Russians have lost hundreds of thousands in this war is bunk. It is the complete reverse. Ukraine has lost 400,000 dead because of their tactics, because they have been given only a few months of training on multiple operations. It's not the right term for it, but it takes years to teach people how to combine your planes, your trains, your tanks, your APCs, and your infantry to do all this stuff together. It takes years. And you can't do it in 2 months. And I was watching these poor guys. It's criminal, actually. I think if you sent Americans to battle with only 2 months basic training and mixed operations, and they would have the same disaster. I was watching it before my eyes. I said, these people don't know what they're doing. And it's worse. They know enough to do it even worse, because some are learning it, some are doing it right, some are wrong. And it was this chaos. The Ukrainians were coming, and the Russians, who are trained, well trained, and massacred them. And then when they didn't have tanks and guns, and tanks and armor to roll in with, they started human waves I never thought I'd hear that term at this late date in military history, but they started human waves. And because they started using US old stockpiles, because they ran out of 155 millimeter shells to give the Ukrainians, started using cluster bombs that were 20 years old. It means a lot of them don't blow up, and then they're like mines. They're there, and kids can step on them, people can step on farmers for the next 10 years. So the Russians say, well, okay, we also are not signatory to this being misused. And our cluster bombs are modern. So, I mean, the Ukrainians are coming over just, the cluster bomb is perfectly suited for human wave attacks, and they have been losing tens of thousands more. I mean, Bakhmut brought 97,000 casualties to Ukrainians. Add another 90,000 in this. They've lost the strategic reserve. They can no longer do anything but really defend themselves. And now what the Russians are doing, while everybody is fixated on this, they're starting to do what Grant did on the defensive lines of the Army of North Virginia, commanded by Robert E. Lee at the end of the Civil War. It's a long trench line that Grant, with more people, kept stretching and thinning it longer and longer. So the Army of North Virginia, from Richmond down to Petersburg, was reaching a point after 6 months they were holding, because they're a hell of an army. But Grant's people were just thinning them out until, when the break happened, the whole line collapsed in one day. And that, my friends, is exactly what's going to happen on this vast line from the end of the Dnieper estuary that goes all the way up through Zaporozhye and then turns north to Donbass and across to the top near Belgorod, Mother Russia, the Kharkov wing of that, Kharkov Oblast and Kharkov province.
I'm just going to interject. I don't think you knew this, but my great grandfather on my father's side actually was in battle with Grant at Petersburg and at Appomattox, and saw Lee.
Did he do the fort? There were a couple fort battles. There was also, of course, the crater battle of the crater. That was mostly black troops.
I don't know anything about the Black Crater.
Five Forks. Was he at Five Forks? Because that's the battle that actually unraveled the line.
Yeah. So he was in 18, what was it, 1862. He was at Newmarket, and he was wounded, in the hand. So he was recuperating in Newmarket, and then he was trained. Whoever was the general for that region, because we had different generals at the time, right?
Well, Newmarket. Which Newmarket? What part
this is
was this in
Newmarket,
Virginia,
I think,
or
Virginia.
West?
No, he was part of the Virginia.
Oh, well, he was dealing
West
with
Virginia,
Napoleon of the West, or whatever it called that, McClellan, that fellow who was marvelous.
That's right.
He was marvelous at building armies. He would have been a great chief of staff, but he sucked as a general, because, as Robert E. Lee did tell Longstreet, it's in the movie Gettysburg, but he did tell him this. He said, "Sir, you love the army, but you have to do, sometimes you got to destroy the thing you love in battle." And McClellan couldn't do that. His pretty army wanted, but he was masterful at creating the Army of the Potomac. But anyway, yeah. So, okay, he was in Newmarket. So, yeah.
So he was in Newmarket. He was wounded and this was in 1862.
Right.
And then he was recuperating, and then he was transferred to Grant's army. And
it was a 10-day battle. It was a 10-day battle, wasn't it? Where they had all those battles, and McClellan had to retreat to where the ships were. Near Richmond.
I mean, you know more about
Newmarket. No, I now understand.
Yeah.
It's one of the.
I don't know. Yeah, but he was wounded there.
That was like, it was first time in history that people fought for 10 days nonstop and just did a different battle. And Newmarket was one of the last.
Yeah. So he was wounded there. He was recuperating, and then eventually he gets he gets transferred to Grant's army, and then you fast forward to what I think it
The
was
wilderness.
1864, yeah,
Yeah, that'd
and
be
then they're
wilderness.
marching down, and then they're battling, but that last two battles he was in there. He was in Petersburg, and he was at Appomattox, and saw Lee
Oh, well,
surrender
then,
to Grant.
man, he was probably at Five Forks. I mean,
That's
that's what broke the
but
line.
what's really weird is that my father, now he's in the nursing home. He has ischemic dementia, but he had this picture of my great great grandfather holding his grandson, which is my father's
Wow.
father.
Wow.
And it's so weird, you know, and at that time, it's just horse and buggy, right?
That's
And this
true.
guy, it was so weird. Back then, it was very common for people to be in kind of like these suits that were like whitish. They almost looked like Colonel Sanders.
Yeah.
That was like the style at the time.
Mhm.
So he kind of looked like Colonel Sanders in a way
Well,
with
that
this
would
like
be after the Civil War. That's more in the
yeah,
1870s and 80s.
well,
Yeah,
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 right,
yeah.
right. So,
Yeah.
but he's holding his grandson, which is my father's father.
It must have been summer.
So,
It must have been summer.
yeah,
That's why they were wearing like
yeah,
the
well, it was
Panama
weird.
cloth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that after the war he just went back to West Virginia.
Yeah.
But yeah, it must be because my grandfather, when he passed away, we buried him in West Virginia. So that's probably where all his family was.
Well,
But
that was also a
it's
major part of the
weird.
Civil War and West Virginia. And my people, the Hogues, were in Michigan, and I have a cavalry sword from one of them. So I
Really?
wonder
Wow.
if they were in the Michigan brigade, of cavalry. So they might have been actually fighting in the West, but also or I think Michigan Brigade was also Custer, and those people were also fighting in the main front in North Virginia, and Shenandoah Valley. And then when that ended, they went west and through Minnesota, and they ended up in. My dad was born in Mandan, North Dakota. They ended up in the plains of North Dakota, and then my father's father was a true rodeo rider, and he also bred horses in East Montana. And then at a certain point, the reason why my family went to LA is that there was an all points bulletin from Hollywood because silent movies were starting. And the all points bulletin was saying we need real cowboys to train our actors. So come one, come all, and train our actors. So he traveled to Los Angeles, and he came there, and there was this paddock, and there was all these guys dressed up in their grimy cowboy chaps and everything. They're getting there, and my my grandfather, Dutch Hogue, he came there in his best Sunday finest with a nice dude hat and a little cravat and vest, no gear, and they're all looking at him. The Hollywood people looking at him. So one after another, they think this guy's crazy who doesn't have his gear, so they're just going through the first bunch of people, and they all get dumped by this horse. They had to train the horse in a few minutes and tame it. And so everybody got dumped, and there's, okay, dude, what are you gonna do? And he took down his cigarette, he leaped on the horse from the back without a saddle, without and he got the horse into the sun and done it. And they said, "You're hired." So that's how my father got into studio grip work. He looked 21. He was 13 when he became part of the union.
Yeah.
And my father and my grandfather worked there for a time. Then he went to be a construction guy. But yeah, it's funny. My grandfather, I never knew him. He died in the 30s from too much alcohol, but he was in World War I, and he got real drunk one night because he was in the supply logistics, and he got drunk, and he said, "I want to go to the front." So he got into one of the tanks, he cranked it, and he was driving drunk towards the Western Front. Everybody's chasing him. So we're kind of
It's funny.
strange
That's
people.
hilarious.
And
I,
so anyway, so he had this big gash from his appendix was taken out, and the kids would say, "Oh wow, what did he say?" "Well, son, this is what happened. I was fighting this German in the trenches, and he got me with his bayonet." And we, we come from, as my father would say, a long line of bullshitters. Great
my father,
storyteller.
it's interesting because my father was a tanker. He was stationed in Germany in
Ah,
62, 63, 64,
okay.
and his appendix burst.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was stateside when it burst or if it was in Germany, but I think it was in Germany when it
Oh, okay.
burst. But back then, when it bursts, I mean, it's serious, right? And you got to clean out the wound, you got to
Oh, yeah.
take out the appendix, right?
No, well,
It's
when I was on the Oregon
and he had a
Commune.
huge scar. He had, I mean,
Yeah, well,
it really, big indent,
oh yeah,
where the
I was in
scar was.
the Oregon Commune when my appendix was about to burst, and had a sense that something was going to happen. So yeah, so fortunately, my scar, I can't do what
So
my.
what age was it when that happened?
I
He
was
was
28
28. Yeah, my
when I
father
when
was
it
probably,
burst, but it's funny because it happened. Sometimes it's in the family. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so
so
my father must have been around 23, maybe 24 when it happened. But I wanted to. Are you familiar with the Zohar at all?
a little bit.
Okay. So in the Zohar, there's um, deep mysteries that are discussed about Torah portions, parshas, um, and it's kind of divided into the five books of Moses, right? And each part of the Zohar gives you this mystical understanding of that parsha that's read for the five books of Moses. In Numbers, I think it's parsha. I think it's pronounced Balak. Um, it talks about most of the Zohar are these rabbis that are on this journey. You don't really know where they're going,
Hmm.
and they run into people randomly, and you're supposed to, and they have a conversation. You're learning about this conversation. Sometimes it's people that are that passed away. It's
Hmm.
it's a ghost.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's a little kid. It's the son of a ghost, and it's really weird. Okay. And so in the Zohar, it talks in this portion of the Zohar, it talks about Ishmael and Esau. So
Yeah.
so for the ones that don't know, you were talking about Ishmael coming from um, Abraham, and how Hagar had Ishmael, and then Abraham with Sarah had Isaac. Now Esau was also part of that kind of Isaac line. All right. Now, the way the Zohar frames this
No, no, I
is
have to
that there
stop you
were
for a
three
moment.
mountains.
I just have to stop. Well, you're not
Yeah.
talking about the name of Jesus, which is also some people know him as Esau or Esau. This is a different thing.
Yeah, this is
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just want to
yeah,
make sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. These are the twins. In the story they talk about the twins, and the first
Okay.
one that was born out of the twins was Esau,
Okay.
and this is Jacob's children.
Okay.
I think it's Jacob. I think it's Jacob and Esau, isn't it? Or I'm not sure if it's the son of Jacob or if Jacob was one of the twins. I don't remember.
And Jacob is
So
the prophet of the
so it's
Egyptian prophet
Abraham,
Pharaoh,
Isaac,
right?
and Jacob. So yeah, Abraham, Isaac, and then Isaac. I thought had twins,
Okay.
and one was uh, Jacob, and the other one was Esau. And
Okay.
so, all right. So, but Ishmael was already thrown out of the tent
Right.
because, all right. So, okay. So in the Zohar, it talks about the three mountains. Now, I don't remember the name of the other two mountains, but Esau was asked, the people of Esau. When we say Esau, we're talking about the people of Esau, right?
Hmm.
So the people of Esau were asked, "Will you accept the tenets of the Torah?" As they go, "What's in it?" right? Like, what are you buying, right?
That's
So
right.
they go, well, and they go, we'll accept everything, but we don't like this thou shall not kill, because we are hunters, right? And
Mm.
we, that's our trade, we kill, right? So we can't accept it. So, okay, so Esau doesn't get it, right? Even though he was firstborn out of the twins,
Okay.
right? All right, and then Ishmael is asked, the people of Ishmael is asked,
Mm.
and then they go, what's in it? And they go, well, we like everything except this one thing, and it's adultery. You can't have because we were blessed to be fruitful and multiply, right? So we can't accept it.
Well,
So then eventually the Exodus happens, and Israel,
no,
the people,
yeah.
are, asked, will you accept the Torah? And the way it's phrased in the Torah is that the people never asked what's in it. They said, yes, we'll do whatever it is. And then, we know the story, the story at Mount Sinai.
Well, and maybe that's
So
why.
the main point here from the Zohar is saying that the last people to to be asked to accept the Torah were actually the Jewish people, and that these other individuals that were, quote, firstborn,
Yeah.
were given the option to get the blessing,
Yeah.
but decided not to take it. So
Mm.
from the Jewish perspective that's written in the Zohar, this, I know, I'm throwing in, theology here, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some bias because I'm Jewish, but
Yeah.
the
There
thing the
is.
thing here is but the thing here is that the the construct here is that the firstborns
Mhm.
were given first option of right of refusal,
Yeah.
and they refused it.
Mm.
Now, I don't know. I've never read the Quran. I suspect, though, that there's probably something in the Quran that talks
Oh
about
yeah.
this, something similar. But so this is where this debate of, like, who
Mm.
who has the ownership of this birthright from
Right.
Abraham.
Yeah.
It's right. This is
Oh,
the
this is,
tension
yeah,
right
this
here.
is the
This
problem.
right.
I mean,
This issue right here is about
yeah,
which
who's legitimate?
individual decide which individuals decided to take the precepts of the Torah.
Yes, and the it's interesting because what I've read of the Quran, it's basically Muhammad is definitely interpreting it towards Ishmael's advantage,
Yeah.
and as the Jewish people do it towards their advantage.
But here's
And
the thing. Here's the thing, though. Here's the
yeah,
thing. That, again, I'm biased, but here's the thing.
yeah,
If it was offered to Ishmael first,
mm,
I think it was Esau first and then Ishmael, but
okay.
I could be wrong in the order there. But
Yeah.
definitely before Israel. All right.
Coming out of the tent.
Yeah, yeah. So Ishmael, if he accepted it, there would have never been a Moses. There would have never been an Exodus. There would have never been the 40 years in the desert. There would have
Yeah,
never been King David. There would have never been the first temple. There would have been never the second temple.
yeah,
So this is where, there's historical evidence that,
yeah.
these things existed, right? So,
These
there,
opinions, which became a course of faith, and yes, or it's literal, but yes, I mean, and it's true because there would not have been a division between the Egyptians and Moses. They wouldn't have been slaves because it would be all one big family still of Abraham, but there was a division, and now we're coming to a head. The division,
Mhm.
which has such deep roots in the programming and the views of people, is, if it can't be resolved in some way, it will destroy the Jewish and the Arab people. And that's what's kind of scary about this war, is how this could go so terribly wrong. I mean, the Jewish defense forces are not trained or equipped. They're already stopping and having a little pause. And they're thinking, oh, we're going to prepare a little more. I hope they're going to sit back and expel all their artillery, wiping out the city, the concentration camp, flattening it like the Warsaw Ghetto was flattened. I just, in my article, found this unbelievable aerial shot from a Nazi Luftwaffe plane looking straight down on the northern part of the ghetto of Warsaw. And except it's just all powdered rubble and bricks and just slight little mounds where the houses were and the roads. There's nothing left except some church, Christian church. It's all gone. And if there's a deep urge to let's finish it now, let's be at an end with these Palestinians, let's wipe out Hamas. And now the whole world is gathering, and there is a very interesting development happening in America's future as a respected negotiating power in the world could be at stake. There's the BRICS nations have been quiet about all this because they've been doing high level visits and discussions about what to do. And the Chinese remained until yesterday completely quiet. The Russians Putin was doing more of the open talk about it. Now the Chinese have chimed in, and now there's a lot of members of BRICS that are key players in the Middle East. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran and they all have a vested interest. The Egyptians do not want to overwhelm their government by getting 2.5 million people that they know will never be able to come back. So this is terrible situation where the Palestinians have nowhere to go except be fish in a barrel that's going to be hit by all kinds of bombs. And it's going to eventually, with time, as this drags out, the one thing that's going to happen is, if we take Mosul as an example, not so much Stalingrad, but even with Stalingrad, the Germans had 60,000 casualties before they were surrounded in Operation Uranus and stuff. So I found out just how many, and that was like 12,000 dead and the rest were wounded and 2,000 missing. But Stalingrad isn't a good version because even though it's long like Gaza Strip, almost the same length, it was not a city of more than 440,000 before the war. But Mosul's a little closer because 1,800,000. Mosul is in the northwestern area. It's the second largest city of Iraq in the Sunni section, for the people who don't know. And it suffered a 5-month Stalingrad-like battle where U.S. planes with Iraqi Air Force just bombed the crap out of it and basically made it a ruin. Not one building was left unharmed. And then they went in, and there were only 15,000 ISIS troops there. But the Iraqi Shia militias and the Iraqi army and the Kurds all together lost 25,000 dead. And they were only fighting 15,000. There's 40,000 well-trained, prepared for the ISIS were fighting that battle not because they had been planning for it, not even at the amount of time that Kurabayashi's forces on Iwo Jima had to dig in and prepare. It was just they're there, here comes the battle, it's just the streets, but you've got a whole catacomb of bases that have been established since Hamas was established by Israel and given the okay to divide Palestine, which I think goes, it's been many years. It's dropped out of my mind when that happened, but it was a while ago when Hamas came into being. I think it must have been in the 20,000s, the 2000s or something like that. It could be earlier, but anyway. So they've had a lot of time. And they prepared for it. They stockpiled for it. They got the water stored. They got the food stored. They're ready. And if the Israelis have to get to them by blowing up all the civilians who have no food and water, this is a humanitarian disaster that has not been seen since the Holocaust. And the world is already starting to get worried about that. And on top of that, this could be a military disaster for the IDF. If they're going to have to learn how to fight urban battles by fighting it, they're going to lose tens of thousands. They're going to lose if you look at the full thing, and we're talking about killed and wounded, it would be like maybe 100,000 killed and wounded. That's 1/5 of the Israeli Defense Force of a country of 6 million people. If Americans now Russians have not been losing the numbers. It's a 10-to-1 ratio roughly, and there's even BBC and others that have corroborated this, even though it doesn't get reported in the American news. Nobody wants to hear accurate news about that. Is that there is a group of people that work out of Latvia, Russians, dissidents, that have tracked every notice of a soldier's funeral from the war. And they've extrapolated that the Russians, and then adding another 6% for people who are missing, people who are not there. It's a pretty good calculation. The Russians have lost 40,000 dead in this war, but the Ukrainians have lost 400,000 and dead. That first army that NATO trained for 8 years, it was pretty much they're all dead or wounded or retired out of. They're gone. I mean, the biggest things the Ukrainians are suffering is they don't have veterans. They don't have any sergeants anymore. They don't have. You can't win a war without that kind of talent. When you lose that talent, then you are only able to throw them in like herds of sheep for the slaughter, and that they can't do. So they're being stretched out, just like what your great grandfather experienced at St. Petersburg. And it will all unravel. And now that there's no financing and money coming to the Ukrainians, I mean, they may throw some bill to them, but all the shells are now going to go to Israel now. And that means they're going to run out of ammunition. And so in the middle of all this thing that could drag on in Gaza, we might wake up one morning and go, holy shit, Ukraine just folded. It imploded. The government went down. Everything went down. Russia is now advancing with nobody to fight all the way to Western Ukraine. And that this is kind of shot from the blue. We were talking before we got on the air that we were talking about how in my last video where you was talking about how explosive things are and how sudden and big everything could change overnight. And I mean, and here we are. I mean, I've always seen this scenario coming, but when it finally came, I was even surprised. When I woke up on Saturday and going, what? Looking at what's happening. With all of Hamas penetrating deep into South Israel, taking up 27 settlements, taking up major towns, and a lot of army barracks and kibbutzim that had been for years the army barracks for guarding Gaza. And they were just caught completely by surprise. I mean, I never thought I'd see a day where I see a whole pile of Israeli men and women soldiers that just piled over, just like bowled over, just. They were like, it's a classic example of some garrison had been completely surprised and overwhelmed before it really had a chance to even get its stuff together. I just can't imagine the
right.
Jewish army of 73 would have done that. But it's another sign that Israel's got a training problem and a tactical problem and an inability to sustain the kind of damage that they want to inflict on Hamas. And all Hamas has to do, boys and girls, is survive. And that's victory. It's just exactly what happened in 2006 during the Lebanese month war, in 2000 July war, where where suddenly they were throwing rockets like crazy into northern Israel. The Israeli armed forces, its armor and all of it, they couldn't even get out of the approaches to the Hezbollah trenches, which were also designed, and they were all taught by the Iranians. There's a minimum of 1,000 Iranian special forces always with Hezbollah. It's probably a lot more now. The other thing that's concerning me is that Iran has been announcing that if this a charge into Gaza happens, if this military operation goes in, they've now openly said, and this is before that Suzanne Sayed, who's well known for being a person who makes up stories. She said it in the Wall Street Journal that Iran give them the go ahead to go 10 days before it happened. That's been patented. That's like the baby's heads. It's false. But what the Iranians did say today, and Eoxos was, I think, one of the sources I saw it, is to say reluctantly, saying if you go in, we will unfortunately have to get involved. Now, that the way Iran gets involved is always the way Iran gets involved, by their proxy, Hezbollah, just Shia militia, the best trained Arab soldiers in the Middle East. They've been fighting the ISIS and Al Qaeda, and they've been fighting in the Syrian civil war for 12 years. They are seasoned. I would not want to go up against those guys, because then the question is, what are they going to do? Are they just going to advance into northern Israel? If ever there was an organization that could do that under a hail of rockets, it's them. The other problem with that is that Israel has said, well, then there are certain, I think it was anyway, some of my contacts had I think it was Scott Ritter, one of the best analysts out there. He's been a source of mine since 2002. He's the guy that actually got famous for standing up before the Iraq War and said, look, he was a UN inspector after he was a major in Marine intelligence, and fought on the staff of Schwarzkopf in the Persian Gulf War. He later then was given a job using that intelligence expertise to track down and see if Saddam Hussein, if they got all of his weapons in the post-Persian Gulf War situation where he had to have it all damaged and blown up. And it's quite a story. And the shocking story is that Saddam Hussein was really close to building bombs, doing it in a way no one expected, but that was the shock, that he was really close to having the know-how to tip his Scud missiles with atomic weapons. And it would have been a whole different story if they landed in Israel at that time. And then the response from Israel, which is the biggest open secret in nuclear agencies, that they have at least 200 nuclear weapons of all calibers, hydrogen as well as atomic. It could be 600 in some estimates. Ironically, most of that was tested in South Africa, when the only friends the apartheid nation of South Africa had was Israel. And there's even the famous Vega event where they saw some ocean explosions, some open air tests, and they were doing open air tests in the Kalahari Desert to test their atomic weapons. So yeah, they've got them. The basic laws, a backstory to what is happening in a war that I don't think, if Israel follows the sword, they will perish by the sword. I don't see where Israel wins this one if they try to once and for all. I mean, if they really, and they've been avoiding going into Gaza for how many wars? There was that little time when they went into the, in 2014, I believe, where they went into one of the suburbs and annihilated the suburb of Gaza and did close quarter fighting, and they lost, in this little town, they lost 62 dead. And the Hamas guys beat them out of there. So then they just blew up the village. So, but the Hamas guys probably left in the tunnels. And so that was when it was objectively a problem that obviously the Israeli IDF has not been training their people. They don't have, I have not seen any bases where they create a Gaza situation. So every unit can go into it over the years and learn how to wage urban warfare. Now Hamas has a training camp in Gaza. I've seen it. I've seen them training in it, learning how to do it. And it will be, if American mothers and fathers in 1969 during Tet Offensive could not tolerate the loss of 250 American boys a week in Vietnam, and they said, this is too many. Imagine how a small, that's nearly at that time, that was nearly like 200 million Americans, and back then 69. If a country of around 200 million can't tolerate that, if Russia with 150 million can tolerate losing 500 to 1,000 a week, probably not that high. It's actually going way down now. The Ukrainians are kind of don't have anything to shoot at them anymore. The Israeli fathers and mothers, I don't think they can tolerate what is going to be, could be hundreds of Israeli their children slaughtered every week in this kind of urban conflict. So politically, I don't think Netanyahu, the people say, after a while, the blood will come down, and Hamas trapping their emotional reaction. Let's go and get them, and that's exactly what Hamas wants you to do. They're, they're kind of evil, but they're not dumb. And since they have already put out that they would be open to a armistice, a ceasefire, Hamas today said, yeah, we'd be open to that. So,
that was today.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know.
They're working it. They're working the situation better. I mean, they were lying when they made the apology about, oh, we didn't tell them to do that. No, they shouldn't have massacred those people. Oh, please. Just look at the MO of Hamas all these years, blowing people up in buses and stuff. Like, come on. So Hamas is, but, they're playing the propaganda game well. And it's horrible, but it's like the loss of life, the martyrdom of Palestinians, the loss of life of the IDF that it's never encountered before in its military history is all playing in the favor of Hamas. Now, somebody had a great, it was Scott Ritter had this great debate, very intelligent debate between both an Israeli soldier and in Israel and him. It was a great debate because it's not the kind of where people start acting like 3-year-olds throwing names at each other. They were just respectful. They were trying to work the problem from, very pro-Zion, and then Scott over here, who's a unique insight. And the guy said this something that really resonated with me. He says, well, how do you defeat Hamas? You don't defeat Hamas by what does Hamas have? A lot of Palestinians don't like Hamas. They're not all lockstep with Hamas. That's all they've got in their prisoners in this concentration camp. And if the Sonderkommando of the concentration camp, which would be in Warsaw ghetto terms, the Nazi picked policemen keeping law and order and suppression in the Warsaw ghetto, Hamas is kind of like that to them. That's all they've got, and sometimes they're fighting for them, and sometimes they're blocking them from leaving with this ridiculous order to move 1.5 million people in 24 hours with no food, water, electricity. Even don't even know if they have to move. Their phones aren't working anymore. Leaflets can fly all over the place, but that doesn't mean everybody finds out. And of the hospitals, which will have all these people that can't leave, there are all those thousands of people are going to die without medicine and stuff like that. So it's just, these are very ill thought out moves from Yoav Gallant and Netanyahu. They're emotionally guided decisions. They're not stepping back. Don't suppress your emotions, but don't decide when you're in the hot, I want to get those people. You will make a mistake, and you will play its weakness. You play into Hamas's strategy. But Scott had an amazing thing. It just popped right out. He was saying, well, the way you defeat Hamas is not militarily. You win back the Palestinian people. You start giving them a reason for being. What does Hamas have over them? That's all they've got because they're prisoners. What if you take their prisonhood away and let them be equal human beings? Hamas will be gone. They'll disappear like dust because the Palestinian people will not be supporting them. If you treat the Palestinians like human beings and start creating slowly. And he said, look, it's not going to happen. It's like the guy said, well, what do you think is going to happen if we even start this kind of talk with it? Somebody's going to blow up a bomb and we're back to square one again. Yeah, that's true. I mean, what the Israeli was saying. But he said, okay. And then Scott said, well, you can't go from A to Z. You've got to take this slow, and it'll take time, and you have to kind of go in stages, and it may take years. But you go in stages, because really, actually, it will take years, because we're not just talking about a resolution that happens one day. We're talking about a generational period where things slowly get better, and that reprograms people to be more open to each other. Trust is developed, and there will be setbacks. But this is going to take 10 years. It's going, if it does, it's too fast. I mean, that would be amazing if it took 10 years. But, we've got a generational thing to pass through. And this is going to be a long, slow process. But, and I'm kind of oddly hopeful that the humanity of all people involved, when they realize that if you really go in there like to commit a second Holocaust, only it's now your cousin brothers, the guys that didn't agree with the Torah on that one point, but they're still your cousin brothers, and sisters, and that's blood you're killing, blood of Abraham. Whether disagreements happen, the disagreements about the Torah can, if not resolved in respect, you continue to disagree. Nothing wrong with that. But if by disagreement you mean you cast you out, and then it becomes a power struggle when one side of Abraham's family has a little more power than the other, and then you got the victimizer thing again. And that will lead to the death of everybody. There's no future for Israel or Hamas or Palestine in this mess. Now, the plan that is being now coming out, this plan of the BRICS nations, and I've been saying, and I think I said it in my last interview with you, is that I see great hope. I have seen it for years. It's one of my long shot prophecies that really seems to be coming true. When I saw the BRICS rising around 2010, I said, this is going to be the answer to the old hackneyed ways that America does things. And it's like, this could be another force, another voice that could alter economy and kind of take away the power of the US dollar to tyrannize people rather than be something you want. I mean, it used to be when I was younger that everybody wanted the US dollar. It was great. It was richness. But when they started saying, we'll take your US dollar away if you don't do this, this, and this. And this weaponizing of the dollar has destroyed the US dollar as being a global currency. Nobody could do anything about it until actually the BRICS started really becoming more than a debate club. And in this year, in this last summit they've moved into being a real alternative. And that is even speeding up since the EU and NATO and America froze Russia's central bank in the beginning of the war. The whole world went, what? If you can do that to Russia, which, by the way, they've always said it was an economy the size of New York City or something. Well, now it's finally out of the bag. Now that Germany has descended and collapsed as the fourth strongest economy in the world, Russia has replaced it. Now we're getting real figures. And Russia is thriving. They prepared for those sanctions since 2014. They were ready. They had bank walls, if you will, and stuff. Ruble is not convertible in international markets. So the ruble, all it has to do is keep passing the ruble at that time around each other. And the ruble's not. The ruble is funny because when you hear people in the West saying, oh, the ruble's now at 100 to the US dollar, it's collapsing. No, the ruble, that's people who don't understand how the ruble works. They willfully, the Russian economy, when it's getting too hot, when it's getting around 50 to the US dollar, everybody should be, oh, look at that, it's so strong. Yeah, it gets too strong, it becomes too expensive. So they then up their rates, their interest rates, and then bring it down to around 75 to 100. That's when the ruble works best. It's cheap enough. I mean, they just have a lot of printed money, but it's cheap enough to be competitive. So the ruble's a whole different creature than the United States. God, these people don't. Such a crime how our press does not do their job. They don't know shit. And yet they come out and they go, I watched it coming working amongst them. Since 1987, I watched this thing coming, the descent of the fourth estate into a propaganda organ that just repeats. Even the sources are, our sources tell, well, who are they? Our source, well, do they have names? Our sources, yeah, I know your sources, State Department. So that's propaganda, that's not the fourth estate. And it's very dangerous. As I've said before, one of the prophets of the Third World War, who also predicted World War I and II, talked, and Nostradamus talking about wars being prepared by the West around the time of a great pandemic, COVID, and the West prepares wars against the East, and with Stormberger's comments, they don't know what the East is. They don't want to know. And so they march with their eyes wide open into these catastrophes. And so what's happening, though, is the BRICS has a proposal that Russia's kind of been the point person for Putin, exactly, which is intriguing because of Casey's prophecy that this Russia, the Russia that exists now, was what he was talking about in 1944, because it's post-Bolshevik. And it was supposed to be emerging as a power. Well, that didn't happen in the 90s. It was in the ground. In fact, maybe 10, 20 million Russians died from suicide and neglect when the Soviet Union collapsed. It's coming out more and more that, I mean, all the people that were on pensions, they just cut off the pensions. Well, what happened to those people with no more money? A lot of them committed suicide. I mean, it's coming out how many people died. Thank you, US, who always gets upset about people meddling in elections, when in Time magazine in 1994, 96, they have Yeltsin with his rough, flushed, drunken face on the cover of Time magazine. Our guy is the president of Russia. Har, har, har. And I was thinking, I just have to wave that in front of all these Americans and say, don't, what about the Russians? They got into our, there was a Russian problem with Trump and all that. There are 82 political attempts by the United States since 1945 to alter elections, and often very successfully, like the taking out of Mogadishu. I never get his name right. Apologies to all my Iranian friends or Iranian friends. But he was democratically elected. The Shah was voted out. You don't want a Shah anymore. You want democracy. British Petroleum freaked out because the Iranians wanted to actually own their own resources, not be a colonial hack. MI6 called CIA, and they overthrew the democratically elected government in 1952 or 53, I think, and brought back the Shah, who then created the Savak, which makes the SS Gestapo look like kindergartners. They were vicious, and Iran descended into an era of darkness and terror under Shah Reza Pahlavi. That actually, because of the consequences of that, by not respecting the democracy is supposed to respect democracies. Not if they don't agree with to be slaves of us. That's not so. What happened in 78 and 79 is that consequence was it brought the revolutionary Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic of Iran was created after the secular revolution kind of evolved into that. So whether you like it or not, America, your moves created the Islamic Republic of Iran, which now is becoming a powerful regional superpower like Israel, but actually more powerful than Israel. It doesn't have nuclear bombs. That's true. If Israel uses them, they will be a pariah in the world. And no nation is an island unto itself. If they use atomic weapons, they will be isolated and banished from the rest of the world. And So can't do that. So it's a waste of a lot of money to do that. Now the Iranians have built a massive regional ballistic missile system, the Shahab's missile family. And there's nothing the Iron Dome can do about that to stop those missiles because they're hypersonic or supersonic, not hyper. They're Mach 3. Iron Dome just goes, boop, boop, boop. It's won't even launch before it's hit. So you won't. So they can conventionally destroy Israel like Israel can destroy for a period Hamas and the Palestinian areas. So, but the saving point, and it's in my articles, is I'm seeing that this move by BRICS is to actually not start from step one. The United Nations has already put out the two-state idea. It's already part of the UN resolutions. And what they're planning to do, China, Russia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, South Africa, and all, and also the African, there's an African group that also that they're considering, actually, if they change the Security Council, that there's going to be a group of African nations that will have a seat, so that the African continent will be represented. So all that's kind of in the works. So anyway, what's going to happen is it's going to be, actually, it may happen in a few days. There's going to be a Security Council meeting, and the BRICS are going to present their idea. Now, America's in a real pickle with this. They don't want to veto it. So they're going to try all kinds of rules and regulations to prevent this vote even coming to the table. And that's not going to look good with time. And if they manage not to vote for it, or if they're forced to vote and veto it, then the BRICS are going to take it to the General Assembly, and they'll win it. Just like Israel won its independence thanks to the General Assembly vote in 1948. It might have been the end of 47, but anyway. So what we're seeing is a shift in political axes, where a group of nations who are not in dominating the world like America, but are all about a community of nations, a multipolar world, where you're no longer American Puritans coming in uninvited and saying, you've got to change this. Your democracy is not going fast enough. It's got to be like ours. But we aren't you. We have our own way of, no, you have to be like us, because we see the world like isolationists, only we're an empire that goes right into your home and sees you only how we imagine you back home, and not a whit of the way you really are. This is a unique thing in history. It's the empire of isolationists. It's an oxymoron. I mean, it's like, how do you end up, even Britain had to kind of adapt. A lot of the European colonies lasted long because they did have to adapt certain things. But American comes in and says, I don't care how you manage this all here, Mr. Congo man. You're now going to do it as the Americans do it. But it's a trouble. Well, I don't care. This is it. We have the power, and we can clamp your dollar down. But anyway, that's the way we are. And remember, the sun never sets on a U.S. military base. Like the sun never set in the British Empire. Well, the sun never sets on a U.S. military base for now. But anyway, so what's going to happen is, this is a process that in the long term, if America doesn't get aboard and become a part of this community rather than a dictator trying to control this community, I don't know if they can do it. They might have to go back for a period and really be isolated and just have what's left of the collective West. Can we have cheaper LNG gas after you blew up our pipeline to Russia? And we're your friends. What's left of them? Germany and stuff like that. If you do this to friends, God knows what you're going to do to enemies. Who needs them? Enemies when you do this to your friends. So anyway, so this ends up being this situation where America is not only losing the power of its dollar, it's losing the power of its diplomatic credibility. And so this is big. This is one of the big things about this current crisis. And it's tied into, everybody forgetting Ukraine as well, because that's going to implode. So, Joe Biden might have two disasters in his short 4-year presidency: the collapse of Afghanistan after 20 years, and now after dumping hundreds of billions of dollars into Ukraine, all of its and its Nazis collapse, and Russia collapse, and Russia takes back what used to be Russian Ukraine, which would maybe Kiev remains a rump state, but Odessa, all that's going back to Russia. It used to be part of Russia. There are Russian cities. Kharkov is a Russian city, full of Russians, and this is going to happen. And I have a funny feeling, though, that when people see the prosperity, like Mariupol is being rebuilt very rapidly, it's beautiful what they're doing. They're turning it around, and when this war is over in the Donbass, that will also happen. And over time, the people that are in what's left of Ukraine, who all were part of Russia for hundreds of years, they're going to start going, you know what? Those Nazis in Kiev, they really screwed it for us. Putin was trying to keep Ukraine together, and then because the Nazis say, no, you can't do that. Over our dead bodies. Well, now there are dead bodies, because that's the way of Nazis. They are kind of Death Eaters. I mean, the 2 times that Nazis came to power in a European nation, in both times, world wars began. 1930s, 1940s in Germany, a National Socialist, race-oriented, the culture of one race-oriented apartheid government. You go to 2014 to the present, another bunch of Nazis, who not neo-Nazis, these are old school Nazis who killed hundreds of thousands of people for the Nazis in occupied Ukraine. The Banderaites, of Stefan Bandera, the George Washington of OUN, the very Germanic Nazis. In fact, they believe they're like pure Slavs. They don't have Mongolian blood in their Slavishness. I've seen them talk about this openly. They say, yes, well, we have the Swedes and the Aryans in us, and we are Aryan Slavs. We are pure Slavs. And frankly, the Galicia division was one of the best non-German SS Wehrmacht, Waffen-SS divisions. They were mostly used to suppress occupation areas. So they were involved in lots of massacres. So that whole hunk of Nazi that got up not once but twice to applause from Trudeau and Eglin, the deputy prime minister, who has a whole Nazi story in herself. I mean, Ukraine has a Nazi problem. A lot of the Galicia division surrendered to the British in Italy at the end of the war, about 6,000 of them, and they first went to England. England didn't want them, so they went to Ontario and populated all the areas around Toronto. And Janet Eglin when she went to Girl Scout school, it was all wearing the Bandera uniforms and doing this that you're not supposed to do in public. And she was trained like a Hitler Jugend of the Ukrainian version of it. And so she's full bore Nazi, and not unproud of it. I mean, she was just like, oh yes, here he is. And guess what? They don't say this in the press, but they say it in the alternative media. And I checked it. Mr. Hunka, Yaroslav Hunka, it's not the first time he's been vetted and checked by Canadian security and all, because they have to check everybody in a state thing like that and see what their background is. I know his background. I've gone to his website. It's in Ukrainian, but there's Bandera and all the symbols and stuff. I mean, he's not hiding the fact that he's a fascist at all. And so there he is, getting up and going, Oh, I feel a lot better about all those people I massacred in Slovakia. Um, and then, but this is not the first time Eglin and Trudeau had him there. He was appearing in 2007 in the same Canadian Parliament to be awarded. Or he's somebody who fought the Soviets in World War II. Now, there's got to be some pretty poor history classes, and all those parliamentarians are all going, oh wow, that's kind of cool, yay, that's pretty cool, eh? If you're fighting Nazis in World War II, who are you? You're not Canadians who lost 40,000 fighting Nazis. You're not Americans. You're not French. The only people fighting the Soviet Union during World War II were the SS, the Wehrmacht, the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Slovaks, and some of the Slovak fascists and all. They were fascists, and of course, rank and file. But Mr. Hunka didn't belong to the rank and file. He was SS, Waffen SS. So, I mean, that is what took over Kiev in 2014 when the Maidan revolution was resolved, and then there was the Maidan coup that disbanded the government of Yanukovych, who was voted in, the last one truly voted in by all Ukrainian peoples, the 40% that are Russian and everybody else in Ukraine's. They were voted. And so a lot of people, Russian speakers, were saying, wait a minute, we didn't vote this crew to come in as a provisional government after the overthrow of who we voted for. I mean, guess what would happen in this country if that happened? They go, wait a minute. And then these guys are all who's who of Sloboda Party, right, Pratley sector, which is right sector, just dripping with Nazism. First thing they do is they start saying, you can't speak Russian and write in Russian in government buildings. And then it got worse. So it's like, and then we're going to clean you all out with a lot of threats. And then here comes the militias, right sector and Svoboda and all these people, Azov Brigade, all of that, all brandishing their swastika flags and everything. And I've got all the pictures of it. And that's when the Donbass people decided to do what American Minutemen did. They formed militias, set up roadblocks, and defended their people and their land and I've heard so many testimonies from some of the great war correspondents like Patrick Lancaster, who lives in Donbass through all of that, and others who the common story the rank and file people in Donbass say as they're ducking from the artillery shells every day for 9 years, terror bombing, thousands of civilians killed and wounded. They're saying, I grew up proud to be a Ukrainian. I might speak Russian, but I saw myself as a Ukrainian. I am living Ukrainian, proud of my citizenship in this, proud of my country. And now I discover that a majority of Ukrainians, they don't want me here. They don't even want me alive. If I stand, they will, over my dead body, take my lands and properties. And like they're saying, they don't want to deal with us. They want to kill us. And so that's not the way to resolve problems. And that's why if you want to take Hamas out, stop killing Palestinians. And the other thing too, I got to say, to make full circle, the bestiality that happened at the opening of this war where people were killed, many Israelis were killed, is the consequence indirectly, but an important point of karmic circle. If you treat people like animals, because people aren't animals, they have the potential of being Buddhas and Christs. When they lose their humanity by the way you treat them in a concentration camp, they will, that's wrong, they're not animals. These people are below animals. And the way Israel's treated them had a big part in turning them into humans that had lost all their humanity. Even animals don't do what they did in those, in those protection rooms all smeared with blood and all. Animals don't do that. They don't destroy their own species like that. So, everything's connected all the way back to Abraham. And, it's almost like my favorite Negro spiritual that Chester Harrison plucked out of being lost to the world. He used to go around all his life and write down all the Negro spirituals, so that just like Ralph Vaughan Williams, the British composer, went all through England, writing down all the English folk songs so that they would survive. And, it's one of my favorite. Is it goes, rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham, rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham, rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham, oh, rock of my soul. So everybody in Israel and in Palestine got to rock their souls back to the bosom of Abraham, and tolerate who likes the Torah or who disagrees with the Torah, who loves the Torah and disagrees with the Quran. That's God's judgment. Let God decide about the end of that. Just live like good people and don't sin. And don't sin to yourselves and each other, And so I think the BRICS are going to create a situation where they're Israel's hope. Now, the thing that's ahead that's going to be a challenge is going to take all Scott Ritter's all 28 steps of the alphabet. Well, now we're take a few years to get to B, and now we're all agreed on C, and to get to XYZ, one of the biggest problems is Zionism. Its darker side is something that even Albert Einstein, who was a Zionist, who was believing in let's create a state of Israel back in 1948 on December 4th in the New York Times. They had this whole long list of well-known Israeli intellectuals, artists, scientists, and they all signed on to an article, and I have it quoted in my newest set of articles coming out in a few days, where they said we have concerns about the I don't remember. I know the party is called Likud, but I still haven't got my head into the Hebrew of what was Tuver or something or other was the first name that Menachem Begin, who is the Irgun fellow, who was actually, one could argue, Israel's terrorist in the fight in the committing acts of terror. And they were even talking about it in the thing. They're saying what their concern is that the conservative side of governments that might be coming to establish our democracy, Jewish democracy in Israel, they were very concerned that the conservatives could revert to, actually, and it's their words, Einstein's words, they could become fascist, just as fascist as the Nazis, and use the same techniques, because they were using those techniques during the fighting in Transjordan before the guerrilla activities. And Menachem Begin ended up eventually becoming Israeli prime minister, and Likud really had a dominance for a long time. And what Likud did, and this is from my Israeli sources, friends, disciples of Osho who are sannyasins like me, who were telling me front up, because we have a lot of Jewish disciples, and they were saying there's a demographic war going on, especially since the Soviet Union broke up. The successive Likud parties, the Menachem Begin, then there was the Labor for a while, and then when the Yitzhak Rabin was shot, that's the only time I cried like I cried when I heard Kennedy was shot. I cried in the same way, and I was just like 8 when that happened, but it would just hit me. And then when I heard that Menachem Begin had been shot in the back, I just fell on the floor sobbing. I just felt, oh no. I was also feeling like this is the beginning of a long step towards darkness for Israel. Just like Kennedy's assassination began the long step into darkness for America. And it hit me the same way as a prophecy. It's like, oh God. And the way he was shot in the back, and the way that I've watched the rallies that Netanyahu, where he just sat neutral, watching these people with Rabin's head stuck on a dog being hung, and Rabin in an SS Gestapo uniform. Oh my God, kill him, kill him. And they're openly saying, hang him, kill him. And Netanyahu never once said, stop this. This is not right. This is not holy. He just was like going, did I say I'd say something? Are you reading something in me not saying something? And I mean, Rabin's wife was, to her dying day, said he murdered him to get into power. I don't know. But certainly there was a climate in that election was where any madman, like the man who shot him in the back, who was an extreme Zionist, right-wing, racist, killed Rabin. And so the two country agreement is what they're going to try to bring back to life again. Only this time without the United States sabotaging it, but really try to make it work. The Chinese are in, they're all, it's like, let's make this work. Now, the big problem with that is the most virulent center of Zionist fascism is in the West Bank settlers. And, you know, if I understand the agreement the United Nations resolution creates is back to the 67 borders, that means the West Bank and the Gaza Strip become the state of Palestine, and Israel before the Six-Day War, that all remains part. So Jerusalem will be part East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem will both be the capitals of both nations, Semite nations. What are they going to do with all those settlers? What are they? I mean, it's really over my dead body, and I often shoot a lot of my neighbor Palestinians to get their houses. I just come in and take the house. I've got it on footage. You see it all the time. And when these Palestinian people were being cast out of their own house, they were talking to this Jewish guy from Brooklyn. It is a lot of American Jews that are some of the worst fanatical people in this. And he's saying, well, if I don't take it, somebody else will. You know, and so, you know, all peoples have their dark element, and that hatred, that racism, just, you know, fascist, the danger of the basic laws being altered, the way Netanyahu is a disaster for the future of Israel. He's a rolling long-term disaster, longest serving prime minister. And it's been going down the tubes. And now it's reaching a point where Israel's existence is being affected by this whole idea that the Knesset will be able to vote out the Supreme Court. I mean, the laws have been changed back in 2018, and all the laws were changed. The basic laws were reinterpreted, and the reinterpretation was the definition of National Socialism: a Jewish state for Jews, a German state for Germans. You know, if you look at the definition, it's exactly like Nazi Germany. So it's Nazi. It's, call it Zionism, call it another name. It is a dark shadow over Israel. It is, and you know, the future. There's two futures. You've just followed the allies of them over the years when South Africa was banned and isolated. Israel was arming its police departments, its forces, those big iron IPCs, armored personnel carriers that all the black people were being oppressed by. They're building Israel in all those years. Israel was actually keeping the apartheid government going when the rest of the world was trying to make them a pariah for what they were doing. And now South Africa changed. So South Africa's got to have that kind of change like happened in the early 90s, where all that agreeably, both sides, the apartheids, the whites and the blacks, moved together, the ANC and stuff, to try to create a peaceful solution. That's the future I'm hoping for Israel. Like the Palestinians being the blacks and Zionists being the whites, and they get it together as neighbors, maybe not in the same place, but they all both have their homeland. That's one way it goes. The other way is the Battle of Berlin, the absolute destruction of a state which has become fascist. It has no future. It will be destroyed, just like Nazi Germany. And I hope that doesn't happen, because I am a mutt from Northern Europe and Scandinavia and Ukraine and everything, but there's a line of Judaism in a lot of all that. So I am also part Jewish. So I my German relatives spelled Hoffman with one N, not two. And so I have Ukrainian Jews, the Mutz family. There's a name. And yeah, so I've got some genetic skin in the game too.
I just think, just looking at my arc of, 51 years, this is the first time that I really felt where my antennas went up with conflict in Israel.
Yeah, me too.
And I just feel that there's something different about this. And what is interesting, I'm not overly religious, but I'm in the middle in terms of religion. I'm not, where I'm not religious and I'm not ultra religious. I'm right in the middle. But this year was the first time I actually did at the end of Sukkot, during Sukkot, you're shaking the four species. There's the palm branch, the myrtle, and the willow branch, and then the esrog, right? And you shake it during the prayer, certain prayers during chakras, for each day of Sukkot, except the first day in this case. I think it started, and it also started on Sabbath. But at the very end, you take the willow branches. Some take 5 branches of the willow. I had 2 branches of the willow. And at the very end of a certain prayer, you take those branches in your hand and you hit the ground 5 times. Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to symbolize that this is something similar to quieting the prosecutor from the shofar. Right. This is at the very end. You're slamming down and you're saying, you're trying to wash your sins, and that you'd be a better person, and you're stomping out the prosecutor, right? This is the first time I ever done this in my whole life, John.
So we've got the omen of the shofar not being blown, and this. Right, well, yeah.
Right.
Well,
right. And this happens.
I'm hoping more people
a couple
in Israel,
days before. This happened.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I think a lot of people in the Jewish world are having, this is different. Where do I stand with this? Because warning signs got to be felt. This is like, wow, this might not.
This feels more than
can't
just
go away. One group wants to make it go because it's just not going to happen. But if they keep pursuing it, we've gone through a lot, and now this happens, and it's like we might not make it through this one.
These cycles.
I'll just say quickly, is that otherwise I'll forget it. Is for years, for decades now, I've talked about the Samson option and the option of never, the journey of never again. In the Holocaust, the Jewish community kind of let down their people by just saying, hey, don't make up waves. Just, we've been through this before, it'll pass. And there was even a lot of prophecies from rabbis and things all down through centuries, which I've collected, where they saw the Holocaust coming. It's not just Heinrich Heine, and when you start burning books, you burn people next. It was very prescient, but there was a rabbi in 1873 who wrote a whole book about it, and I have it. And I'm finally going to have a chance to talk about it, where very clearly saw the Holocaust coming in Germany and all of that. So the thing is that in the first Holocaust, because now I'm looking at the possibility of two Holocausts, and I have been since 1990, I started seeing the possibility, is that, and the possibility happens because of an overcompensation for the mistake of being too passive too late to recognize it before they were overwhelmed by Germany and all of that. And the fact that so many people in the community were already voicing concerns, and the authorities were saying, no, 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 don't. We've been here before. It'll just pass. How can Germany be this terrible thing? They only have 100,000 troops now that the end of World War I's happened. What are you talking about? Well, that changed. And the other thing, saying that Hitler never was coy about all this. My God, I don't know if people say that. I've seen this speech in March of 1939 after after Czechoslovakia disappeared into the protectorate of Bohemia. And he made the old speech, and I heard him say it. I know he's German and know what he was saying. He says, and this was broadcast on radio all over the world. He says, if there comes a time where the Jewish people and Jewish bankers once again drag Germany into a world war, I will become a prophet today. It will be the end of the Jewish people in Europa. So it's like, got the warning, folks? Got the warning? No. So a lot of bad feeling about the mistake of that is now potentially going the other extreme, being too aggressive, being too intolerant, to the point where the overcompensating for passivity, the Jews of today bring upon themselves a second Holocaust of their own making by just not calming down, just sort
You're yeah, you're picking up on something that is really deep, and I feel as though there's a cleansing that's going to take place.
I hope,
And
well,
that cleansing is not going to be pretty, and
no,
all parties, not
no.
just Palestinians, not just Israelis, it's going to be the
The
whole world.
Iranians, the
Yes.
Iranians, the Syrians, everybody who is of blood of Abraham, and the Persians too. Yeah, no, you're right. It is going to be difficult. There's a lot to be cleansed, but the healing must begin. Otherwise, there'll be no one to heal.
Well, I take it even farther. I mean, when Blinken made his statement, when he landed and was, had his press conference with Netanyahu, he said something that my antennas went up.
Yeah.
He said, as long as the United States is around, or is something on that effect. I'm paraphrasing him,
Mm-hmm.
but the what I picked up was is that there is going to be a time. I can't tell you when, but there's going to be a time where Edom, right, the United States, is no longer going to be the superpower. And we may be actually seeing one of the straws that breaks the camel's back, with the whole BRICS thing and the problems with Ukraine and with Russia and China. And we may actually see that there's just too much going on, and we're seeing the empire starting to crack.
It's already happening. And I said that was
And
a major factor. It was a major factor in this. Yes. Go ahead.
the United States is almost like, this is going to sound really strange, especially from a biological point of view, but
Mm.
the United States is like the yolk. And what is going on in the Middle East and in Israel, and the Israelis and the Palestinians, the Arab world at large, but that whole region, something is forming from the yolk of Adam.
Mm.
And that once the yolk is no longer needed and the fetus starts to develop,
Mm.
we are the country we call the United States will no longer be.
Yeah, it won't be what it
And
is.
it's hard to, right. So we're
No,
seeing
it is.
we're seeing this point in time where there's a fetus that is starting to develop
Yes.
from the yolk of Adam.
Now this astrologically has a very interesting context. The United States has only existed for one orbit of Pluto, 248 years. since 2021, the return of Pluto back and forth, retrograde and direct, will have 7 strokes. 2021, it was there for the election of Biden. 2022, it was the day before the war with Russia that NATO is fighting, pushed by America. Anyway, yeah, and then there was a time, another couple swings where it got clear that the Ukrainian adventure is becoming a disaster for. Yeah, one of them was when they were planting the bombs on Nord Stream 1 and 2, when America took a step to an act of terror against its own allies. So these are like steps where you pick a man who has dementia. You do another thing. Oh yeah, it was the COVID. The next swing was when everybody was locked down, forced to be locked down. The American economy was ordered to stop by mostly people who were not elected. That was number 2, just a few months after Biden was elected with COVID. And that damaged forever the country and our democracy and a lot of things, because people who were not elected started to unilaterally in an emergency make decisions that they were not legally able to do. And that has really corrupted our democracy. So these are stages of the end of America as we know it, in preparation for a new beginning, which comes after 2025, when all of these passes over Pluto's natal position at 27 degrees Capricorn are finished. Now, we just had the 6th. When 10th of October happened, it went retrograde into direct course. This thing that's exploding over us started right at the final slowdown of the retrograde a few days before, 4 days before. So this crisis of war in Israel is significant to what is the yoke is giving, is dispensing, rejecting, and creating. A great step. All these steps are the end of US hegemonic work. So a year from now, a little over a year from now, is the 7th and final pass, just before the US elections in October. Yeah, you just can't make this cosmic crap up. I mean, it's just amazing. And not only that, but we're having these eclipses. We had an eclipse, very beautiful annular eclipse. I saw it, the big crescent yesterday morning, or morning before. It was beautiful. And now we're having another eclipse that's going to literally take the Great American Eclipse of 2017 of August 25th. It's literally, as that one went this way, it's going to come up through Mexico and X the United States out. Those the 2 shadow lines, X. And it's happening 8th April of next year. So the portents in the prophecy field, there are just portents coming out of existence's ears right now. And the astrology is such that what happens when now Pluto will continue to be in orb of influence, having an influence on that natal position into 2026. But what's intriguing about it, and it's already brewing, is the Capricorn influence will dwindle with each of these orbs as it finally, when it gets 5 degrees, that's about when it's not really going to be so big. But when you're within 5 degrees, it's now in the years following the 7th pass, it's going to get more revolutionary and humanitarian oriented, because it's entering Aquarius. And then you have an interesting return of Pluto at the position of the French Revolution, which was the igniter of what we created in America in isolation to becoming a global phenomenon. And that happens in the mid-2030s. So we are entering times, and you can feel it. You can even feel it in all over the place. People are kind of going, this government does, they're saying it in Europe, they're saying it in Australia. They just threw out the Labour Party in New Zealand completely. People are saying, my government, in many places, are saying, my government doesn't represent me. It represents some cabal. It represents some aristocracy, something I've been writing about for 30 years, where fascism, I said, would return in the 2020s, and it would take on a corporate aristocracy quality of trying to create a controlled world. And this is before I even knew about Klaus Schwab and all that, but that's just part of it. That's just the circus part of it. There's a lot bigger than that. It's the deep state. It's a lot of these things. There's an attempt in the name of democracy to make an aristocracy, which, by the way, last time when the orbit began with the United States, when Pluto, when the United States was born, that was the point when middle classes were first appearing in Europe and in the British colonies in America, which gave a lot of profits and enhanced aristocracies to their pinnacle in the last aristocratic cycle. And when it was over and it went into Aquarius, that pinnacle of aristocracy collapsed into revolutions. It took a while. Some of them went dramatically, but it is the beginning of the end of influence of the globalist, fascist, corporate way. Mussolini said that a better definition for fascism in Italy was corporatism. Corporate. So, that corporations, wealthy people take over the government. They may keep it up in name only, but they rule through some special emissary like the Duke, El Duce. They rule the game. That's fundamental fascism. And so, fascism comes from the Roman twigs and hatchets that were held in the beginning of the Senate, and it was always passed to a tribune to signify the Senate's giving power to a tribune in times of emergency, like with Cincinnatus. The fasces is what it's called. It's where, because Mussolini made that the symbol of his National Socialist Italian movement, that's where you get the term fascist. It's new. It's a relatively new word from fasces. And so, but not in the terms of the power of the Senate, like it was originally intended before Rome had the same problem where it got too big for its britches. And, democracies can't sustain themselves if they're large, huge countries dominating the world. It can't. I mean, Britain saw this and they gave up their empire to save their democracy. Rome lost their republic, and got dictatorship, the Roman Caesars to the end of Rome. They could sustain it because democracy is messy. Efficient governance is always fascist. It runs like a machine. The trains are on time. Everything's great. I mean, I've been in Singapore, lovely food, very clean. Never lived there in my life. When I was there, it was like, wow. So this is how Hitler's fascist nation might be. I'm going to upset a lot of Singaporeans. I'm sorry, but it's like, and they had this big poster at the side of a whole building where a bunch of neighbors are going, be sure you always watch your neighbors. They're all like going, God. You turn the corner and there's this poster, it's like, watch your neighbors, be secure. Okay. Well, and then, yeah. And because I had long hair, the cops were all stopping me and all that like that. It was like, okay. But when I was all tired from coming out of India and I'm going from Changji or whatever the hotel, whatever it's called, every step of the way, the cabbie first and then the hotel guy, they're all saying, do you want a girl for tonight? And I was like, Cabby was talking about, we've got at least 4 different races that live here in Singapore, and these girls are great, and these girls are great. Can I do something for you? And I don't think so. And then I get into my hotel room, and I get this phone call. And I just about to go to bed, and I go, hello? And it says, hi, this is the front desk. Would you like a girl for the evening? I'm kind of tired, thank you. Click. It's like, my God, they're really pushing it hard. So, yeah, so there's always that. I guess it's their version of Lebensborn. I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, it's it. I
There's a
think we're done now.
people. I feel as though there are individuals like yourself, and but I think there are individuals that can they sense something. There's a resonance that's taking place. Some people, that Hertz level is, really high, and
Yeah, yeah,
with events, and other people, they don't have that. They're not in tune, and so it's very low,
yeah. The
resonance.
heebie-jeebies, I call it, or if it
Yeah,
were to be
I,
kosher, I would call it the
but I,
Hebrew-jeebies.
I some
Yeah, it's
people,
coming. I'm
I feel
feeling it.
people are feeling it, and it's
Yeah,
like there's something different about this, and
yeah.
it's like what
This is this could with time take the Jewish and Palestinian people and the rest of the world in a direction that hasn't happened for thousands of years.
yeah.
It's this kind of, I've been saying the 2020s would have this quality of the pendulum of history. The invisible is moving, and it's moving into new territory. And the hegemonic collapse of America may only take 24 more months. And then I gotta say, for the sake of Americans, what comes after the crash of that and the difficulties, and there will be difficulties, we'll have to live by our own means again, like Americans used to do. We can't spend what we don't have, but the U.S. dollar is still going to be a player in world currencies. We are also a continental nation with lots of resources. If we rebuild our industrial base, we will be not a bully, but a significant brother state to other brother and sister states. And and the other thing that will happen is, when we have dropped the burden of trying to hold up the whole world like Atlas with our 800 bases and billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of budget, as Alexander Macuris of the Duran talked about, he said, when Britain lost the burden of empire, actually it felt really good. It was like, oh man. And they got one more step to do, he says. They got to drop the United Kingdom and just speak jolly old England again. That's the last step in their process out of empire. Just let it go. Just be England again. Just be Israel again. Just have Palestine be there, what they're doing, and just live simple, and drop all this hubris. And of course, if America is undergoing it, it's no wonder that Israel and the extreme elements in Israel are kind of freaking out, because they're losing the big dumb brother who used to come in and get his nose bloody going fighting Israel's enemies. Well, big dumb brother is not going to be around not very long. This in a few months, there's going to be a clear understanding in the world that not only is the dollar not to be used anymore, be a user of us, but America's credibility as a global negotiator of great treaties and all will be over from this interchange that's coming in the Security Council, followed by maybe a general gathering of all the nations voting. And what's going to happen is, if America doesn't step back and allow this to happen, or just join along, if they try to stop this, the world will turn away not only from the dollar, but from America as a political entity that has global influence. It'll be another major step in America's, a necessary step for America to come home. We have never been an empire state. It's just until this period of time, which kind of happened as an accident. Usually when America fought a world war, even World War I, we built up all the stuff, and then when the war was over, went back to a private, peaceful industry. But that wasn't able to happen at the end of World War II. We did the arsenal of democracy. That's what got us out of the Depression. So we got a taste of how we make a lot of money with wars. And then it just happened that we ended up with this Cold War with Russia, which lasted 45 years. So again, that's a generational reprogramming that when it was done, you had United States hooked on war drug, the drug of war, the money of war. And that kind of sickness has spread to other major super systems of America, like I call it, the MIC, the military industrial complex, infected people in the SIC, SIC, the sickness industrial complex, where healing is no longer a healing, it's a business to make money off of sickness. And so this is the levels of America's addiction to things that make some people very rich at the cost of the people and the nation and democracy. That's all going to start falling away, and it's also going to be a toxic release for us in America as much as it is going to be for Israel and having the big brother. But the good news is that Israel will have friends. Israel will have the BRICS nations. They're trying to make this work for Israel as much as for the Palestinians. It'll be more equinimical than anything that has happened before, and a lot of that but it's going to take maybe 45 years for it to completely leave the system, because these are long-term programming. So there's a lot to be said about generational changes, but they do take a generation is what, 20 years if you just talk about from baby to being a young man. Some people like to think of it as 30 years when that same generation becomes politically active and it changes things. So either between 20 or 30 years, it could take that long to kind of completely get, or it will go faster if certain things in the world become more important to deal with together as a family of nations, which bringing more security in the short term to the world and just stability and no more preaching and all that. Just let nations deal individually, respect all nations. And if you want to change something in another nation, be the thing, don't preach it. You just be the thing that you are, the ideal. And if you're that, people will be attracted in their freedoms. Why are you guys doing so well? Well, this is, since you ask, I respect your culture to do it in its own period, and we don't want to impose, but we can just simply tell you this is what we've done that made it work, and see if some of this works for you, but in respect to your own culture, not this is what you should do. We are Americans. No. And it's funny how even the way I did it's almost like that's how Shirley Temple used to act when she got a bit pouty. Well, Mr. So yeah, they don't Shirley Temple it. Just drink a Shirley Temple. You won't get drunk.
Well, thank you.
On that note, we did an even longer one this time.
Yeah, thank you, John, for for this. I think that people are scared. They are sensing something that's different. There are other people that are ignoring it, and I think that
To their peril.
Yeah, but through your perspective, I think people are learning, the events in a certain lens, and there's many different takes on this. And I think what's beautiful about this show, I think, is just that people that are going to watch it, there are some that are going to be very pro-Palestinian. There are going to be some that are very pro-Israeli, and there are going to be some very pro I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm only American and hell with everybody, and very isolationist.
Yeah.
But I think that, if they actually really listen, a lot of wisdom is being said here, and that there's a path forward, but people need to realize that, what, there's a dangerous time that we're going through and you need to pay attention.
This is the good thing about dangerous times. Everything is a blessing if you alchemize it. Dangerous times are when people wake up. So I bless dangerous times. I bless the challenge of these times, because only in such times do people really start to grow.
Right. Well, I think that's a great way to end this. So the ones that are, watching, in the description of this video and all the videos that I do with John Hogue, there is a link that you can click and it'll take you to his website. Please click please, purchase his monthly or weekly periodical, and he does these readings. I had a reading a few years ago, and they're kind of fun. They're very interesting, and I highly recommend. But please help John out. Click the link. He'll take you to his website, and subscribe, and try out his different services. So, John, thank you again for this.
Thank you.
I'm sure we're going to be doing another one soon because I
Yeah.
think we're going to be a little bit more rapid
Yeah.
pace.
Well, I mean, I can't. I mean, it's all. I've got to like do more of these things because my God, I've spent a whole week writing about this. So I'm writing this so that it'll kind of cover all possibilities for the next month or two. But still, so I can see myself being on your show more. And I was on Coast not long ago. I'm going to be on again on the 13th of December, and it's definitely roll out the Hogue. Yeah, something's happening.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you again for coming onto the channel. We'll schedule again soon, and
Okay.
just say goodbye to the folks that are watching.
Bye. Bless you. I love you all.
All right. Let me stop the recording.